Hello and welcome back to another video. This is the 6th episode of story where Naruto responds to his isolation in a way that deviates from canon. What strategies will Konoha employ to handle a seal master Jinchuriki who possesses a subdued attitude yet an outrageous perverted side? Please like and subscribe to show your support. It's high time to begin. Orochimaru woke up to an unfamiliar sensation, his chakra sluggish and unresponsive, like trying to wade through molasses. It was there, but distant, utterly beyond his control. He felt it in every cell of his body, but for the first time, he could not shape it, could not bend it to his will. As he sat up, his sharp gaze swept the brightly lit cell around him. All four walls of the room were cold, unyielding stone, except for one. The wall in front of him was something else, not quite glass but perfectly transparent, revealing three familiar faces watching him with grim expressions. The weight of their judgment was palpable, but Orochimaru greeted them with a smile that could curdle milk. "Kukuku," he chuckled, his voice oily and unrepentant. "The reunion I've always hoped for. Wishes do come true." But there was no warmth in the reunion, no spark of camaraderie. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the man who had once been his mentor, stepped forward, his aged features like stone, his voice sharp and deliberate. "This cell," Hiruzen began coldly, "is secured with a series of fuinjutsu. If needed, I can cut your oxygen supply. I can heat the room until nothing remains of you but ash. Or I can reduce you to a fine mist, as Naruto recently demonstrated on one of your subordinates." At this, Orochimaru's smirk widened, though his eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the boy's name. "Naruto-kun has been busy, hasn't he?" he drawled, as if savoring the thought. "And if," Hiruzen continued, ignoring the interruption, "by some impossible miracle, you escape this cell, there are seals on you designed to kill you instantly. Stall in giving us information, and you die. Try to escape, and you die. Displease me in any way, I die." Orochimaru finished mockingly, his voice laced with sarcasm. He tilted his head, his yellow eyes glittering with challenge. "Go on, sensei. Tell me how you'd love to do it yourself." Hiruzen's voice didn't waver. "I'll open this cell and show you why I am called the professor, and you the student." Orochimaru leaned forward slightly, his tone gleeful yet taunting. "It'd almost be worth it, wouldn't it? To see if you could. Could you, really? Could you beat me to death, sensei?" "If Danzo hadn't been present when I found you," Hiruzen said, his voice dark with suppressed rage, "you'd already know the answer." The tension in the air was electric. For a moment, the cell was silent except for the faint hum of the seals reinforcing the barrier. Then Orochimaru broke the stillness with a chuckle, soft and serpentine. "Well," he drawled, leaning back with the confidence of someone who knew he was still needed, "you've certainly laid out the stick. But where's the carrot?" "Sensei isn't going to give you anything," Jiraiya said bluntly, his arms crossed as he glared at his old teammate. "Ah, Jiraiya." Orochimaru sighed theatrically, rolling his eyes. "Always so slow on the uptake. Sensei may want me dead, but he needs me alive. Especially if he wants the information I have about the Akatsuki. And sure, he could try to torture it out of me, but we both know I'd survive anything you throw at me. Or, in Anko-chan's case, I'd make sure she lost control. I'd die just to spite you. And then you'd get nothing." Hiruzen's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in the room, a crackling undercurrent of tension. "You have a little leeway," the old man warned. "But don't push it." "My list is short," Orochimaru replied, sounding almost bored. "A library. If I'm going to be caged, I'll need something to occupy my mind. Otherwise, I might go mad. And trust me, sensei, you don't want me mad." "Done," Hiruzen said curtly. "What else?" Orochimaru's lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. "Oh, just access to Naruto-kun. The room instantly felt colder. Orochimaru's throat began to burn as Hiruzen activated one of the seals controlling the cell. He was suffocating, his lungs screaming for air. But the Sannin didn't panic. Instead, he stared at his former teacher, defiance burning in his yellow eyes. He smiled even as the darkness encroached on his vision, refusing to give Hiruzen the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Finally, just before the light could fade completely, the air returned to his lungs. Orochimaru inhaled deeply, his smile never wavering. "What do you hope to gain from speaking to him?" Jiraiya demanded, his voice harsh with barely concealed anger. "He isn't like you. He's not twisted or malicious." "Isn't like me?" Orochimaru repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "He's more like me than any of you could ever understand. And whatever you think of me, at least I would have protected him from what Sensei is doing to him. From what he did to me." Hiruzen's brow furrowed, the weight of Orochimaru's accusation settling on his shoulders. "What did I ever do to you other than support you?" he asked quietly. "Support?" Orochimaru hissed, his tone venomous. "You never understood me, Sensei. It wasn't enough for you that I could kill the wolves. You needed me to see myself as a protector of sheep, one of you. Your ideology wormed its way into my head and corrupted me. You made me believe I was something I wasn't. And because of that lie, I watched my students die in an IWA ambush. I watched Nawaki die. Your ideals made me weak, made me care. And when the inevitable happened, when I turned into the monster you always feared, you blamed me for it. Just as you'll blame Naruto-kun when he breaks under the same weight you're forcing onto him." Hiruzen remained silent, his face unreadable, but the words struck a chord deep within him. A pang of guilt twisted in his chest. Had he truly failed Orochimaru so completely? Would he fail Naruto, too? Jiraiya, however, was less introspective. "You're mad," he said flatly. "Am I?" Orochimaru countered, his voice sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Jiraiya, why isn't Minato alive?" Jiraiya stiffened, his fists clenching. "The Kyuubi killed him," he snapped. "Oh, I thought the Reaper Death Seal did that," Orochimaru said, his voice dripping with mock innocence. "He could have chosen another method, one that didn't require his life. But he didn't. Why do you think that is?" "Shut up," Jiraiya growled. "I don't care what you say. If you insult Minato one more time, insult him." "Far from it," Orochimaru said smoothly. "Minato had more self-awareness than I ever did. He knew the real danger wasn't the Kyuubi. It was him. He thought it was safer to leave his son an orphan than to risk what he might become without Kushina. He understood that power, without control, destroys." "Enough," Hiruzen said sharply, cutting off further argument. His patience had reached its limit. "You will not speak to Naruto-kun. Not now, not ever." Orochimaru tilted his head, his smile never fading. "That's a shame," he said lightly. "Because I'll only share my intel with him." Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. "You will find I am more than capable of waiting you out." With that, the three left, the heavy door slamming behind them. Orochimaru chuckled to himself, the sound echoing off the stone walls. It was a game to him, but the stakes were as high as they had ever been. In the hallway, Jiraiya clenched his fists. "Where is Naruto?" he demanded. "I need to talk to him about challenging S-rank ninja." Hiruzen sighed. "I'll direct you to him," he said. But remember, he was protecting a comrade. The morning was crisp, sunlight spilling over the village as Kakashi strolled leisurely through its streets, one eye buried in the latest manuscript from Jiraiya's research. A soft chuckle escaped his lips every now and then, elicited by the antics of Akio, the story's unlikely rogue. For the first time in what felt like years, Kakashi felt lighter, like a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying had finally lifted. He hadn't anticipated the strange warmth that came with finally confronting the shadows of his past and seeking help, but now, he couldn't imagine going back to that hollow, numb existence. This lightness was a welcome change, even if guilt lingered faintly in the background, whispering that he should have sought healing sooner. Still, his students had been a source of pride lately, distracting him from any regrets. Kakashi's thoughts wandered to their performance during the first and second phases of the Chunin exams, and he found himself impressed. All three had come far. He'd hoped all of them would make it to the finals, but even without that outcome, he couldn't complain. Sakura, for one, had exceeded his expectations. Her draw against Kurenai's Genjutsu specialist student had been a battle of wits rather than raw power, and Kakashi was pleased to see how she'd held her ground. She was learning to apply her intelligence and impeccable chakra control in combat, a difficult but vital skill. Still, Sakura remained his most challenging student, not because of her lack of talent, but because her smaller chakra reserves made her less naturally suited to ninjutsu and tracking, Kakashi's areas of expertise. Her potential lay elsewhere, in medical ninjutsu or genjutsu, but both were challenging fields to excel in, especially with her teammates overshadowing her. Naruto was being trained by Jiraiya, and Sasuke had his Sharingan. Sakura deserved a spotlight of her own, and Kakashi resolved to find a way to help her carve out her path. She just needed the right opportunities to shine. Sasuke, on the other hand, had shown surprising emotional growth. Kakashi's sessions with him had finally started bearing fruit. The Uchiha's choice to follow Naruto's advice and get himself and Sakura safely to the tower instead of recklessly chasing after Orochimaru was a sign of maturity Kakashi hadn't expected so soon. It was the kind of decision that marked a Chunin, a leader who could weigh the mission's success and the team's safety over personal pride. But now, Sasuke faced a greater challenge, Gaara. Kakashi couldn't shake the unease creeping into his chest when he thought about that fight. Gaara was an unknown, a Jinchuriki with the kind of raw, unchecked power that could obliterate anyone unprepared. And Sasuke wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially not when he knew Naruto had faced Orochimaru and survived. Kakashi had toyed with the idea of pulling Sasuke from the match. This wasn't a mission. It wasn't mandatory. If Gaara's bijou stirred, Kakashi had no doubt it could end in disaster. But he also knew Sasuke. The boy wouldn't accept forfeiting, especially if he caught wind of Naruto's exploits. The rivalry between them would only push Sasuke harder. Kakashi could already hear the protestations in his mind. If Naruto could face Orochimaru, I can face Gaara. He sighed at the inevitability of it all. A familiar voice broke him from his thoughts. "Hey, Kakashi." Asuma called out, standing with his team near a food stand. The trio, Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino, looked up as Kakashi approached, Ino still sporting bandages from her previous fight. "Team 10, good morning," Kakashi greeted. "You seem to be recovering well, Ino-chan. I'll have to let Naruto-kun know." Ino's face lit up with hope. "You know where he is? Is he okay?" "I do." "He is," Kakashi reassured her. "In fact, he's on a special assignment for the month, so don't be surprised if you don't see him around much." "Oh, okay," Ino said, her expression softening. "Thanks for letting me know. Hinata and I were worried." Kakashi almost laughed at the understatement. He distinctly remembered the cold fury in Hinata's lavender eyes when he'd denied her access to Naruto earlier. She'd looked at him like a predator sizing up prey, and Kakashi wasn't ashamed to admit she'd made him uncomfortable. If she'd had the skill to back up her intent, Kakashi was fairly certain she would have tried to kill him. "Of course," Kakashi replied, favoring Ino with his signature eye smile. "Well, I must be off. I wouldn't want to keep Sasuke waiting too long." He continued on his way, though his destination wasn't Sasuke just yet. He had one more errand to run before training his student. He faintly heard Ino excusing herself to hurry off somewhere, but his mind was elsewhere. The aviary was quiet when he arrived, save for the sound of messenger pigeons fluttering about. Two figures stood in the room, both of them familiar. Samui, the blonde kunoichi from Kyumo, turned to him with an indifferent expression. Her cool demeanor contrasted sharply with Baki's tense stance. Kakashi knew exactly why. He hadn't forgotten the stories Minato-sensei told about the Suna Jounin hitting on Kushina-sama, right in front of him. The memory alone made Kakashi's hand twitch with the urge to summon his Chidori. "Good morning," Kakashi greeted them cheerfully, though his tone held a razor edge. Baki nodded stiffly. "Hataki-san. I hope you're enjoying your stay in our lovely village," Kakashi continued, his gaze flicking between the two. Samui remained impassive, though Kakashi couldn't help but admire her stoic composure. Baki, on the other hand, bristled. "It's adequate," Baki said gruffly. "Such luxury makes a ninja soft." Kakashi's visible eye crinkled with mirth. "Oh, I don't know about that. Our forests are lush, yes, but one could get lost for days, years, even, in that sea of trees. And who can say what lurks within? Why, a wandering sand rat might wander off the path and never be seen again." The room fell silent, tension thick as fog. Baki said nothing, and Kakashi took his silence as understanding. He had more pressing matters than playing with the Suna Jounin, however. "Now," Kakashi continued, his tone cooling. "You both know certain, sensitive information. Hokage-sama has decided to allow it to spread. But, and this is especially important for you, Samui-san, should either of your villages act on this information in a manner Hokage-sama deems deleterious, he won't be as forgiving as he was with Kushina-sama. Or as understanding as he was with Hinata-chan." He didn't wait for their reactions. The message had been delivered, and that was enough. Kakashi disappeared in a blur, reappearing moments later at Team 7's training grounds. "You're late." Sakura's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. She stood with her arms crossed, glaring at him. Kakashi waved her off casually. "I'm only a little late." "What excuse is it this time, Kakashi?" Sasuke asked, his tone clipped. Kakashi didn't miss a beat. "I got distracted by two impossibly round cantaloupes." Sakura turned red. "You pervert." The Hyuga training hall was a serene and imposing space, its polished floors and high ceilings echoing the power and prestige of the clan. Ino stepped inside, her bright blue eyes taking in the scene as she moved to the side, careful to stay out of the way of the gathering. At the center of the room stood Hinata, poised but clearly nervous under the scrutiny of the Hyuga elders. Her father, Hayashi, stood before her with the stern bearing he was known for, flanked by several clan members and Team 8, including Kurenai, Kiba, and Shino. Ino had been unsure why Hinata had invited her here, though she had a decent guess, but she hadn't expected this to turn into a full family event. From the corner of her eye, she saw Hinata glance toward her briefly, acknowledging her presence with a small smile before returning her focus to her father. Ino stayed silent, watching curiously as Hayashi addressed the gathered Hyuga. "Today," Hayashi began, his voice ringing with authority, "we acknowledge my eldest daughter and clan heiress for making it to the final round of her first Chunin exams." Polite applause followed his statement, restrained as expected from the Hyuga but still meaningful. Hayashi let the silence settle before continuing, his tone shifting into something deeper, more personal. "The only way to truly honor her achievement, however, is for me to also acknowledge that I was wrong." A hush fell over the room at his admission. Even Hinata blinked in surprise. "I pushed you hard when you were younger, Hinata, because I believed it was the only way to unlock your potential. I faltered and lost hope when you did not respond the way I expected. When you told me you wanted to be a Hyuga in your own way, I dismissed it as an excuse to avoid tradition. The clan head stepped forward, placing his hands on his daughter's shoulders. The gesture, though simple, carried the weight of years of tension. "I was wrong," he said firmly. "I am glad I was wrong, but I regret that I needed you to prove it to me. You've shown me that there is more than one path forward for our clan, and for that, I thank you." Hinata's face turned red, her lips parting as if to speak, but Hayashi didn't allow her the chance. He turned back to the clan, releasing her shoulders as he addressed the room. "Hers is but one future path for the Hyuga, the first change of many, I suspect. I ask you all to support her, to push her forward, and to remain open-minded as she navigates what will undoubtedly be a long and difficult journey. If we allow it, her growth will benefit us all." There was a pause as his words sank in, and then Hayashi continued in a more formal tone. "For the duration of the month, her Jounin-sensei, Kurenai Yuhi, will oversee her training. Kurenai-san has been instrumental in my daughter's progress, and I will not interfere in their work. However, any resources the clan can provide will be made available at her request." He nodded to Kurenai, who returned the gesture with her own quiet respect. "If there are no objections, we are dismissed." As the gathered Hyuga members began to disperse, many stopped to congratulate Hinata or offer their support. Ino hung back, watching her friend accept the compliments with characteristic humility. Once the room emptied out, leaving only Team 8 and herself, Ino approached Hinata with a wide grin. "Who knew you could earn so much goodwill with one well-timed kick to the nuts?" she teased, her voice light-hearted. Hinata giggled, her cheeks pink but her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I think Niji will hate me for the rest of my life," Hinata replied, though her tone was more resigned than upset. "Oh, he'll get over it," Ino said with a dismissive wave. She didn't know Niji all that well, but his reputation preceded him, a prodigy with an attitude that was just shy of unbearable to anyone he deemed beneath him. Honestly, Ino figured getting his ego bruised might be good for him. "So, what's up? What can I do for you? I'll be healed up in a few days, but I don't know how much help I'll actually be." Hinata shook her head, smiling softly as she pulled out a scroll and handed it to Ino. "I was hoping you'd help me in a more official capacity," she explained. "I need someone with your skills for a little information gathering." Ino blinked, surprised, but she quickly took the scroll and opened it, scanning the contents. It wasn't what she'd expected, but it made sense. Stealth and reconnaissance weren't Hinata's strongest suits, and Ino's talents were uniquely suited to the task. This would be a great opportunity to help her friend and test her own limits at the same time. "Of course," Ino said, rolling the scroll back up with a grin. She'd already decided to accept. Asuma had told her Team 10 wouldn't be taking on missions during the next month, which left her with plenty of free time. Plus, the extra income could fund a much-needed shopping spree for some new outfits. "Oh, by the way, I saw Kakashi-sensei right before I came here," she added casually. Hinata's expression soured instantly. "Any word on Naruto-kun?" Ino nodded. "Yeah, he said Naruto would be on a special assignment for the month. We probably won't see him much, but he's fine." Hinata's face softened, relief washing over her. "That's good. Besides, I'm sure Naruto-kun will get in contact with us as soon as he can." "Oi, Hinata!" Kiba called from across the room, his voice impatient. "We're burning daylight." Hinata turned to him, her expression shifting from gentle to mischievous in an instant. "I didn't realize you were in such a hurry to lose to another girl so soon, Kiba-kun," she said sweetly. Kiba sputtered, scrambling to defend himself. "It wasn't a loss, it was a tie," he protested, his voice rising indignantly. Shino, ever the calm observer, adjusted his glasses. "A tie," he stated matter-of-factly, "is effectively a loss when you were expected to win." Ino burst into laughter at their dynamic, the easy camaraderie between the three teammates a sharp contrast to the quiet, lazy energy of her own team. Watching them, she couldn't help but feel a bit envious of how lively and spirited Team 8 was. It was good to see Hinata surrounded by people who truly valued her, not just as a teammate, but as a person. Karen couldn't shake the feeling of unreality that clung to her like a second skin. It had begun the moment she woke from her near-death that wasn't death at all, a confusing transition from pain and despair to warmth and safety. The strange kindness hadn't stopped there. The hospital staff who attended to her were gentle, their voices soft as they helped her regain her strength. It wasn't what she was used to. Not at all. In Kusa, care meant being patched up just enough to be useful again, followed by more demands, more exploitation. Here, it was different. Almost too different. Her confusion grew when an aged woman, dignified and calm, introduced herself as an advisor to the Hokage. The woman's words had shaken her to her core. She was free from Kusa. Free to stay in Konoha without fear. Karen had heard the words, but they didn't seem real. It was impossible to believe. And yet, in that sterile hospital room, Karen had broken down. All her training, all the harsh lessons of survival Kusa had drilled into her, shattered in the face of this strange mercy. The tears came without shame, spilling from her eyes in torrents as she sobbed in front of the stranger. A good kunoichi wouldn't cry, she thought bitterly. But then again, she was never really trained to be a kunoichi. She was just a tool, a thing to be kept alive, passed around, and eventually used for breeding, just like her mother before her. Kusa had never seen her as anything more than that. How could she not cry now, even if this was all some cruel illusion of freedom? The older woman hadn't seemed to mind. She'd placed a warm, comforting hand on Karen's back, rubbing it gently as she murmured soft words of reassurance. When Karen finally calmed herself, the advisor had explained everything in detail. Her liberation, she said, was thanks to one Uzumaki Naruto, the boy Karen had seen in the forest. That loud, brash, shining boy who had fought with a force and conviction that had taken her breath away. He was an Uzumaki like her, but that was all they shared. She didn't know him, didn't understand him. And yet, he had gone through such trouble to free her, a stranger. For someone unused to kindness or consideration, it was overwhelming. That strange, dizzying feeling followed her as she walked through the streets of Konoha. Karen found herself staring at everyone she passed, people who smiled at her, who greeted her warmly, as if she belonged here. It was almost too much. She had to fight to keep her emotions in check, to keep herself from breaking down all over again. The kindness of strangers felt alien, suffocating in its generosity. Kusa had taught her to expect cruelty, to always be on guard. Here, in this village, the warmth she received made her feel exposed, raw, as if someone had torn away the armor she didn't realize she'd been wearing. Her escort added to the dissonance. The girl walking beside her wasn't just kind, she was stunningly beautiful, the kind of beauty Karen hadn't even thought was real. Outside of stories. With long, glossy black hair and a calm grace about her, she looked like an angel. It was almost intimidating. "We're here," the girl said, her voice soft but steady. "Huh?" Karen blinked, realizing she'd been lost in her thoughts. "Oh, sorry." "What?" "This is where you'll be staying," the girl said with a small smile, gesturing to the building in front of them. "At least until you can arrange your own lodgings." Karen stared up at the apartment tower, its clean, freshly painted exterior nothing short of luxurious compared to the hovels she'd grown up in. It was impossible, far too nice. She turned to her escort, her voice filled with disbelief. "Are you sure?" "Of course," the older girl replied easily, her smile never faltering. "Now, please follow me." Karen did as she was told, unable to stop herself. She was led up to the top floor and into a corner apartment, and when the door opened, Karen felt her breath catch. It was a fully furnished, one-bedroom apartment, complete with a small kitchen and cozy living room. It was clean, well kept, and hers. The girl explained everything calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I'm sure Naruto-kun will come by to set up your security seals, but for now, the key is sufficient. There are grocery vouchers for you to use at the store downstairs, as well as some money for anything else you might need. If you can wait a few days, I might be able to wrangle a friend to take you shopping. She knows all the best deals. And if you need anything else, I'm just 2 doors down. Karen could barely process the words. She stared at the apartment, at the neat furniture and soft colors, and then back at the girl, who was watching her with calm patience. Why? She finally asked, her voice trembling. Why, all of this? Why any of this? The girl's smile softened. You'd have to ask Naruto-kun. He's very straightforward, but not always easy to understand. What I can tell you is that he expects nothing in return. No ninja is that kind, Karen said, her voice sharper than she intended. It wasn't that she was ungrateful, far from it. But this wasn't how the world worked. It couldn't be. The girl didn't seem offended. Instead, her expression turned thoughtful. Several months ago, I would have agreed with you, she admitted. But then, on a mission gone bad, I was captured by the enemy. I was held hostage to stall my master from completing his work. The person who captured me went on to become my best friend, and Naruto-kun gave me a second chance at life for no other reason than because I was his friend. Karen blinked. You mean, you weren't born here? The girl shook her head. No. I don't know what you've endured, and I won't pry. But believe me when I say you can trust in this. In him. Karen nodded slowly, her body moving on instinct even as her mind struggled to catch up. When the girl finally left, Karen dropped onto the couch with a quiet thud. It was blue, soft. And, most startlingly, it was hers. She ran her hand over the fabric, disbelief clinging to her like a shadow. The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the village outside the window. Karen leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This was real. This kindness, this freedom, it was all real. It would take time, she knew, to let go of the instincts that told her this was some elaborate trap. But for now, she allowed herself a small smile. It was strange, this life. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel wrong. Yugao Yuzuki, better known to many as Anbu Nico, was riding a rare high. It had been the perfect start to a perfect day. Hey 8, her love, had woken up feeling better than usual, so much so that he'd made her breakfast. That alone would have been enough to lift her spirits, but it only got better from there. Reporting for duty, she'd spent her morning training Naruto Uzumaki, introducing him to the grueling basic routines of ANBU recruits. And she had to admit, he did well. Maybe she was biased, but Naruto's resilience and drive were impossible to ignore. She'd even convinced him to keep the Kusanagi sword he'd taken from Orochimaru and had started him on beginner katas for wielding a jien. For someone so young, Naruto had an astonishing knack for learning, and Yugao felt a sense of pride she hadn't expected. More surprising still, her unit had started warming up to him, too. Bor had shown him techniques to refine his fire-style jutsu and walked him through advanced nature transformation exercises. Bear had sparred with him, coaching him on how to better harness his natural strength without sacrificing speed. Even Tenzo had taken him aside to train him in something top secret. Whatever misgivings the ANBU unit may have initially held about the Hokage's eccentric plans for Naruto, their efforts to guide him were genuine. It was hard not to root for the boy, and Yugao found herself fully invested. The cherry on top. She'd convinced Naruto to call her Yugao-ne when she was off duty. Oh, how she would savor rubbing that in Kakashi's smug face. So, as Yugao escorted 2 of the Sannin, Jiraiya and Tsunade, to Naruto's temporary room, she felt certain nothing could sour her mood. In hindsight, that confidence should have been the first sign of trouble. Optimism often invited chaos in the life of a shinobi. But Yugao, riding the wave of her good day, walked forward undeterred. She swung open the door to Naruto's room, only to stop dead in her tracks. Her brain stalled, refusing to process the scene before her. It simply could not be real. There was Naruto, sitting cross-legged on his bed, scribbling furiously in a notebook. That was fine. Normal, even. What was not fine were the 3 Naruto clones standing around a shirtless ANBU agent. Jiraiya's wolf whistle snapped Yugao out of her stunned silence. Her blood boiled instantly. Her hand flew to the hilt of her katana before she even realized what she was doing. "What are you doing, agent?" she asked, her voice cold and deadly. The agent, who looked to be around 16, paled visibly. Good. Fear made the kill more satisfying. Antelope? Gazelle? Dead bitch? She couldn't even remember the agent's codename, and frankly, she didn't care. Completing Hatake-sensei's training, Naruto answered innocently, still writing in his notebook. "I think I figured out the hidden lesson, too." That didn't help. That really didn't help. In a flash, Yugao remembered confiscating the ridiculous bra Kakashi had handed Naruto during some misguided training session. She had made a mental note to kill her former captain for that, and now the urge was stronger than ever. Fury clawed at the edges of her vision, and her grip tightened on her katana. Meanwhile, Naruto hopped off his bed and approached Tsunade, casually handing her his notes as if the chaos in the room wasn't unfolding around him. Tsunade skimmed through the pages quickly, her brow furrowing. Despite herself, her expression shifted to reluctant approval. "Damn genius pervert," she muttered under her breath. "Look, Naruto," Tsunade said, closing the notebook with a sigh. "I'll let you run with this under Shizen's supervision. But no more half-dressed ANBU in your room." She paused, her eyes narrowing at her student. "And no fully undressed ANBU in your room either. Got it?" "Yes, sensei," Naruto replied dutifully, his tone as straightforward as ever. "And you?" Tsunade barked, turning her glare on the hapless agent. "Scurry along." The girl hastily grabbed her shirt and fled the room, but not before Yugao leaned in and hissed a parting threat. With the harlot gone and the clones dispelled, Yugao felt her tension ease. Surely, the chaos was over now, right? Wrong. Jiraiya stomped into the room, his face dark with anger. Without a word, he picked Naruto up and slammed a fist onto the boy's head. "What the hell were you thinking, going after Orochimaru alone?" Jiraiya growled. Naruto didn't answer, but he wasn't about to take the hit lying down. Before anyone could stop him, he launched himself at Jiraiya with surprising speed. The Toad Sage assumed the boy was trying to tackle him, but Naruto had other plans. Using the surface sticking technique, he climbed up Jiraiya's body and latched onto his back, locking his arms around the Sannin's neck in a tight chokehold. Yugao started forward to break up the scuffle, but Tsunade held up a hand, stopping her. "Let them be," she said, her tone calm but firm. "They need this. Besides, the idiot won't go overboard." Yugao hesitated, glancing between the two combatants, but reluctantly stepped back. Jiraiya grunted as he peeled Naruto off his back with little effort, slamming him onto the bed. "Nice try, brat," he muttered, yanking the sheets free and using them to cocoon Naruto in a tight bundle. He swung the wrapped-up boy around his head a few times before unceremoniously slamming him back onto the bed. It seemed over, until Naruto broke free with a dynamic entry kick that landed squarely in Jiraiya's most sensitive area. The Sannin dropped to the floor like a sack of rice, groaning in agony. Tsunade glanced down at him with thinly veiled amusement. "You'll live," she said dryly. Scooping Naruto up, she hauled him out of the room. "Come on, brat. We've got work to do." Meanwhile, across the village, Hiruzen Sarutobi sat in his office, a package sitting ominously on his desk. His assistant, Tamano, had delivered it with visible nerves, clutching it tightly before retreating as quickly as decorum allowed. Hiruzen's finely honed instincts told him something was amiss. Opening the package, he found a letter from the Raikage. "Hey old monkey, thought you could hide Minato's boy from me, eh? You had a good little run, but that's over now. Tell him to get faster, I haven't had a rival in speed for over a decade, and I'll judge if he's fit to replace his father. Don't worry, I won't crash the finals, though maybe your grandson will want to learn what it's like when the sky's the limit. Besides, I hear he might have a taste for a flavor of kunoichi only found in Kyumo. Only time will tell." Bounty book name, Uzumaki Naruto age, 12 alias, Konoha's Kiroi Gustapeppa affiliations, Konoha, Toad Clan, Jiraiya of the Sannin, Master, Uzumaki Clan, Kushina Uzumaki, Mother, Deceased, Skills, Fuinjutsu, Bojutsu, Katan Jutsu Rank, Genin Bio, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, student of Hitaki Kakashi and Jiraiya of the Sannin. Single-handedly killed over 60 ninja during a solo raid of a base belonging to Orochimaru of the Sannin and his Otogekure ninja. Also managed to defeat and capture Orochimaru in a separate engagement, killing 8 more ninja in the skirmish. Possibly specializing in infiltration and mass exterminations. The shinobi is silent, calm, and analytical. A threat to even experienced ninja if they are not careful. Engage only if mission critical, Jounin or Chunin teams. Genin, flee. Bounty, one Ryo. Hiruzen's hands clenched as he read the accompanying bingo book entry. The yellow ghost pepper, he murmured, shaking his head with a mix of pride and exasperation. He could hear Kushina laughing somewhere, bragging about the ridiculous nickname. But as he finished reading the entry, the weight of his failure to keep Naruto hidden before he was ready sank in. His chest tightened as thoughts of Kushina and Minato came rushing back. For a moment, the aged Hokage allowed himself to grieve, the flicker of a chuckle fading into silence. Tsunade sat at her desk, the cluttered surface covered in papers, diagrams, and half-scribbled notes. Her brow was furrowed as she flipped through a report, though there was an unmistakable air of satisfaction radiating from her. It wasn't the norm, and Shizun couldn't help but notice. "You seem in a good mood, Tsunade-sama," Shizun observed as she settled into the chair across from her mentor. Tsunade didn't look up, her pen continuing to scratch across the parchment. "You say that like it's a rarity, Shizu-chan." Shizun smiled faintly but didn't argue. Tsunade had been more herself lately, but they both knew the stoic calm and carefully placed jokes were a relatively new return to form. When Shizun didn't respond, Tsunade glanced up from her work, smirking slightly. "Exactly. But you're right. It is a good day. What's brought this on?" Shizun asked, genuinely curious. Tsunade leaned back, exhaling with something close to contentment. "It's nice to cut again. To work on medicine again," she said with a kind of wistful pride. "If I can nail down my part of this stasis solution, we could make a real difference in on-mission fatalities." "A dramatic difference." Shizun nodded, her smile growing. She knew what it meant for Tsunade to be back in her element, saving lives on her terms. "What are you leaning toward?" she asked. "Foam," Tsunade replied thoughtfully. "Some kind of cryo-foam, something that could stabilize blood loss and protect against tissue damage while keeping the patient alive long enough to get proper care." She frowned slightly, running her hand through her hair. "But knowing where I want to go doesn't necessarily get me there any faster. Still, I'll figure it out. I always do." Shizun chuckled softly. "I have no doubt you will." The quiet hum of productivity filled the room for a few moments before Tsunade shifted in her seat, leveling Shizun with a curious look. "And how about your little project?" Her tone was carefully neutral, but there was a faint note of skepticism that Shizen didn't miss. Shizen sighed, rolling her eyes. Really, now, Tsunade-sama. This is as valid a topic for medical treatment as anything else. I know, Tsunade replied, waving a hand dismissively. Her lips quirked into a smirk, and her tone softened. Sorry. Really, how are things coming along? Shizen relaxed, glad to see her mentor was taking her seriously. Good. We've compiled years of data, and we're confident in saying that kunoichi experience a significantly higher percentage of lower back injuries compared to their male counterparts. And the rate only increases as physical activity diminishes. Tsunade raised a brow, intrigued despite herself. Because the diminished use of chakra no longer buttresses the lower back muscles? Exactly, Shizen confirmed. It's the same principle as civilians who suffer chronic back pain. Only, for kunoichi, the problem is exacerbated by years of subconscious chakra use. Without it, the lower back muscles are left tense and prone to strain. Tsunade leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. She hated to admit it, but the revelation made perfect sense. She'd heard the occasional complaint from civilian women over the years about back pain, but she'd always assumed she simply didn't experience it because of her superior physique or rigorous training. Now, she realized it was the same for all kunoichi. They'd avoided the problem entirely by unknowingly reinforcing their bodies with chakra. But when that activity slowed, the issues crept in. Still, Tsunade couldn't quite wrap her head around how this insight came about. She grimaced, glancing down at the papers on her desk. I still can't believe your other student came to this conclusion because of a bra. Shizen bit back a laugh. You know his mind doesn't work like other people's, Tsunade-sama. He sees things differently. That's one way to put it, Tsunade muttered, her skepticism plain. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. I refuse to believe medical advancements will come from that boy's libido. Refuse. And yet, Shizen teased, a playful glint in her eyes, here we are. Let's move on, Tsunade grumbled, waving her hand again. What about potential treatments for this back issue? I've been in touch with the physical therapy team, Shizen replied, her tone returning to professionalism. They're working on a series of exercises and adjustments to help strengthen the lower back muscles without relying on chakra. It's still in development, but the preliminary results are promising. Tsunade nodded, satisfied. Good. And the other thing? Her tone turned wry as her gaze dropped pointedly to Shizen's chest. Shizen lit up, beaming. Oh, it's wonderful, she said, almost giddy. I almost forget they're even there sometimes. It's like a second skin. Naruto's sealwork was, as always, a touch of genius. The adjustable seal he'd designed for the bra cups redistributed and redirected the weight exerted by the breasts, providing a level of comfort and support that standard designs couldn't match. It wasn't anything groundbreaking in concept, Naruto hadn't reinvented the wheel, but his execution was flawless, and it worked. Tsunade raised a skeptical brow. I still don't see why you had to be the test subject. Shizen crossed her arms, leveling her mentor with a mock-serious look. Because you and Nico-san scared off most of the female ANBU when Naruto-kun just wanted to help. Tsunade replied, her tone flat and unconvinced. She stared Shizen down, her golden eyes glinting. That's the only reason, huh? Shizen flushed slightly, looking away. I'm just saying, someone had to do it. Tsunade leaned back again, smirking. Whatever you say, Shizu-chan. Shizen sighed in defeat, but her lips quirked into a small smile. For all her teasing, she knew Tsunade was proud of her work, and, despite her skepticism, impressed by Naruto's ingenuity. It wasn't every day that medical breakthroughs came from unexpected places, after all. The release of the newest edition of the Bingo book sent ripples across the shinobi world, and Konoha was no exception. 3 middle-aged shinobi, veterans of past wars and allies of Minato Namikaze, shared knowing grins as they polished their blades and tightened their armor, anticipating the opportunity to honor a promise made to their fallen comrade. Elsewhere, 2 foreign kunoichi from Kyomo groaned in unison as their Raikage reveled in his newfound excuse to simultaneously fanboy over the Yondaime Hokage and poke fun at the Sandaime. Meanwhile, one poor Chunin instructor flinched at every passing shadow, certain that ANBU agents would appear at any moment to haul him off for interrogation. Teaching a 12-year-old Uzumaki was stressful enough, finding out that the kid had made it into the Bingo book with a bounty, even if it was just 1 Ryo, was terrifying. None of this had reached Naruto yet. The freshly promoted Chunin sat cross-legged in Team 7's old training grounds, scratching Pakin's ears absent-mindedly as he watched his teammate train. Kakashi had summoned him earlier through Pakin, with Commander Dragon giving Naruto permission to step away from his current duties with ANBU to join his old sensei and teammate. For the moment, though, Naruto wasn't the one doing the work. It was Sasuke, and the Uchiha was clearly struggling. It hadn't taken long for Naruto to spot the signs. Sasuke's movements were shaky, his form deteriorating with each strike. His sweat-drenched face was tight with effort, and he was breathing through his mouth, a telltale sign that he was pushing too hard. Naruto frowned. Sasuke wasn't just tired, his body was hitting a wall, and from what Naruto could see, he didn't even realize it. "Stop," Naruto called out, rising to his feet. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Sasuke paused mid-strike, shooting a glare at Naruto but ultimately obeying. Naruto ignored the look and gestured for Sasuke to sit. With practiced ease, Naruto pulled a bottle of hand sanitizer from his pouch, cleaned his hands, and activated a diagnostic jutsu. His chakra flared briefly before settling, and he ran his hands a few inches above Sasuke's body, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. 20 minutes later, Naruto had his answer. "Your nutrition isn't adequate for the level of training you're doing," Naruto began, his tone calm but direct. "Your body is forcing your chakra to compensate for the deficit, which increases your chakra usage and slows your recovery at night. If you kept going like this, you'd hit chakra exhaustion within 3 days, and your body would go into shock." Sasuke stared at Naruto, his face unreadable, though the faint twitch in his jaw betrayed his irritation. Still, he couldn't argue with the diagnosis. He hadn't felt like he'd progressed in the last few days, and the explanation made sense. Nodding stiffly, he stayed quiet as Naruto handed a piece of paper to Kakashi. "What's that?" Sasuke asked after a moment, his voice flat. "A list of vitamins and supplements," Naruto replied, tucking his hands into his pockets. "You could see a nutritionist, but if this is just to get you through the exams, the supplements will be enough." "No training today or tomorrow," Naruto added, firmly, cutting off any arguments before Sasuke could voice them. Sasuke's pride wanted to rebel, but the ache in his muscles and the fog in his mind were enough to convince him to listen. He nodded again, though his displeasure was obvious. Naruto turned to leave, but Sasuke called after him. "Why didn't you give the list to me?" he asked, irritation creeping into his tone. Naruto paused, blinking as if the question were strange. "Hatake-sensei handles the team's expense account," he said simply. Sasuke's brow furrowed. "The what now?" Before Naruto could answer, Kakashi stepped in with his usual air of nonchalance. Sasuke-kun. Greasing the right palms can take you further than violence in many cases. But it wouldn't be right for ninja to lose money while in service to the village. So, for expenses like these, we're reimbursed. And thanks to Naruto-kun bribing Ibiki the other day, I've hit my cap for the fiscal year, which means I can request a limit increase." Kakashi's tone was disturbingly cheerful, and Sasuke stared at him, his analytical mind spinning in frustration. He wanted to make sense of the man, but as always, Kakashi was impossible to categorize. Shaking his head, Sasuke decided it wasn't worth the effort. Kakashi broke the moment by forming a summoning seal, and with a poof of smoke, his pack of Ninken appeared in a cluster of wagging tails and excited barks. "Alright, you lot, have fun with Naruto-kun," Kakashi said casually before turning to Sasuke. "Let's go." With that, Kakashi took off, and Sasuke had no choice but to follow. As they moved through the forest, Sasuke's curiosity got the better of him. "Why did you summon your dogs?" "They needed exercise, Naruto likes playing with them, and I was taking time away from his training," Kakashi explained. His tone turned teasing as he glanced at Sasuke. "What's the matter? Jealous? You want to play with them?" "What? No." Sasuke snapped, glaring at his sensei. Kakashi chuckled but didn't push further. After a few moments of comfortable silence, he spoke again, his tone shifting to something more serious. "You know, Hokage-sama is thinking about pulling Naruto from the team." Sasuke frowned, his gaze snapping to Kakashi. "Why? Officially? Both of you are high-profile targets, so it's safer to keep you apart in case another village tries something. Unofficially, I think Hokage-sama believes Naruto's team with Jiraiya is better for him. He actually gets along with Haku and Sai." Sasuke knew what Kakashi was doing. The man wasn't exactly subtle. "We can work together without being friends," Sasuke said coolly. "True," Kakashi conceded. "But you could also accept that he's not Itachi and try opening up a little." Sasuke's shoulders stiffened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He knew Kakashi was right. He knew Naruto wasn't Itachi. But the boy's mannerisms, his quiet strength and focus, it all reminded Sasuke too much of the man he hated most. And the fact that Naruto seemed to surpass him at every turn only made it worse. "I'm sorry, Kakashi," Sasuke said quietly. "I can't." Kakashi sighed, his usual levity replaced by rare sincerity. "It's fine, Sasuke. I'm not asking for an overnight turnaround." He paused, his visible eye narrowing. "For now, we focus on Gaara. Everything else is secondary." Sasuke nodded, his expression grim. "Hn." The Uchiha's mind churned as they moved through the trees, thoughts of Naruto and Itachi warring within him. For now, he pushed them aside. Gaara was the immediate threat. And Sasuke couldn't afford to falter. The shadows around him seemed alive, creeping closer, whispering his name. Every rustle of leaves, every soft patter of footsteps made him flinch. The bingo book had done this to him, just one entry in one book, black ink on a page that had turned his world upside down. The Kyuubi had done this to him. It was infuriating. But rage was a luxury Mizuki couldn't afford. Rage would make him reckless, and recklessness would lead to mistakes. Mistakes would bring the brats running to Iruka, and Iruka to a team of Jounin, or worse, ANBU. And Mizuki would not survive the ANBU. Still, no matter how many times he tried to convince himself to stay calm, his thoughts circled back to that cursed entry. Uzumaki Naruto. The boy's face stared at him from the page, cold and detached, those dead blue eyes judging him just as they did in real life. The report was as unbelievable as it was terrifying. The brat who Mizuki always knew was off had killed dozens of enemy shinobi, taken down Orochimaru's base, and even captured the snake Sannin himself. How? How? Mizuki's mind raced with questions. How could the Kyuubi, in its human guise, capture a man like Orochimaru? How long before Orochimaru spilled everything? Mizuki didn't know the answers, and the uncertainty twisted in his gut like a knife. One thing was clear, his life was over. If Orochimaru talked, Mizuki's ties to him would come to light. Konoha wouldn't forgive that. They'd hunt him down like a dog. And so Mizuki did the only thing he could, he prepared to run. But even as fear clouded his thoughts, a darker part of Mizuki's nature began to surface. He had always been a man of resentments, large and small. He resented being stuck as a Chunin instructor while others rose through the ranks. He resented the Hokage for never trusting him. He resented being forced to rely on Orochimaru for power. He resented a world that had no place for him, that had turned him into a nuke by default. And in that resentment, a foul idea began to take root. If his life was over, if he was doomed to spend the rest of his days running and hiding, then he might as well take one last piece of satisfaction before it all ended. The academy was alive with the shouts and laughter of children as they prepared for target practice. Mizuki stood at the back of the classroom, his silver hair gleaming faintly in the light as he watched the kids file out. Most of them were too eager to notice him, rushing past him toward the field. But one straggler caught his eye. "Hey, Konohamaru," Mizuki called out in his usual friendly tone. The young Sarutobi stopped in the doorway and turned back. "Yes, Mizuki-sensei," he asked, his bright, innocent face full of curiosity. "Iruka asked me to pull you back for a bit," Mizuki lied smoothly, his practiced smile in place. "Since you've been doing so well, I thought I'd teach you how to throw a Fuma shuriken. It's my specialty." Konohamaru's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really?" "Really," Mizuki replied, motioning for him to follow. "Thing is, the Fuma shuriken is big and powerful, so we'll need to go somewhere else to practice." The young boy nodded eagerly and fell into step behind Mizuki. The instructor led him away from the field, carefully choosing a path that avoided Iruka and any other potential witnesses. His heart pounded, though whether it was from fear or exhilaration, he couldn't say. When they reached a secluded storage shed near the edge of the training grounds, Mizuki opened the door and stepped aside. "Wait here while I grab the shuriken," he said, and when Konohamaru turned to look inside, Mizuki struck. His hand chopped down on the back of the boy's neck, knocking him unconscious in one clean blow. The child crumpled to the ground without a sound. Mizuki stuffed Konohamaru into his go-bag and took off, his legs pumping as he raced through the trees. He needed distance. As much distance as possible. His breath came in sharp bursts, his lungs burning, but he didn't stop. Reach the wall. The thought became a mantra, a steady rhythm to match the pounding of his feet. Reach the wall. Reach the wall. For the first time in years, Mizuki felt like a true shinobi. He moved with purpose, the thrill of action burning away his doubts. Revenge was so close, he could taste it. Hiruzen Sarutobi had taken everything from him, and now Mizuki would take something in return. But in his single-minded focus, Mizuki made a critical error, he forgot about his hostage. Konohamaru had regained consciousness inside the bag. Though disoriented, he remembered Naruto's advice, always carry a cutting tool. Pulling out a small dagger, he slashed at the fabric, carving an opening large enough to slip through. The tearing sound snapped Mizuki out of his trance, but by the time he realized what had happened, Konohamaru had already wriggled free. The boy didn't waste a second. Reaching into his pouch, he grabbed one of Naruto's Fuin beads, a tiny flashbang, and threw it toward Mizuki. The device detonated with a blinding light and a deafening crack, leaving Mizuki stunned. Konohamaru didn't wait to see the effects. He took off running in the opposite direction, adrenaline fueling his battered body. Mizuki stumbled, blinking rapidly as his vision slowly returned. His ears rang, and his pulse thundered in his head. "Ugh, little shit," he growled, shaking his head to clear it. Though he was still disoriented, his shinobi instincts kicked in, and he quickly picked up Konohamaru's trail. The brat wouldn't get far. Mizuki retrieved his collapsible Fuma shuriken, unfolding it with a sharp flick of his wrist. His hands trembled, bloodlust coursing through his veins as he spotted the boy ahead. Without hesitation, he hurled the weapon with all his strength. The shuriken sliced through the air with a deadly hiss, but to Mizuki's frustration, it missed its mark. The boy ducked at the last possible second, the blade whistling over his head and disappearing into the trees. Mizuki's frustration boiled over into fury. He leapt down from the branches, landing heavily in front of Konohamaru. Before the boy could react, Mizuki grabbed him by the collar, lifting him off the ground and delivering a punch to his stomach. Konohamaru gasped, spittle flying as the air was knocked from his lungs. "That's more like it," Mizuki sneered, his grin twisted with malice. He slapped the boy twice, reveling in the look of pain on his face. "You must think you're so special, being the honorable grandson. Walking around like you're better than everyone else because of your precious Nizan. But you don't know the truth, do you? Naruto Uzumaki isn't like us. He's the Kyuubi in human form. A filthy demon, pretending to be human, me." "Mizuki-sensei," Konohamaru croaked, his voice weak but steady. "What, brat?" Mizuki snapped. "Shut up," Konohamaru said, his tone defiant. Before Mizuki could react, the boy slapped a Fuin bracelet onto his wrist. The seal activated instantly, sending a powerful shock coursing through Mizuki's body. He howled in pain, his muscles seizing as he dropped Konohamaru. The boy hit the ground but didn't hesitate, he scrambled to his feet and ran, bruised and battered but alive. Mizuki's screams faded into the distance as Konohamaru disappeared into the trees. Mabui was trying, with all her practiced patience, to tune out Omoi and his spiraling speculation. The oddity of a Fuma shuriken landing near their training area had stirred up his overactive imagination, and he was already deep into one of his fantastical narratives. This time, he was rambling about secret conspiracies, abductions, and daring escapes. Mabui, ever pragmatic, had dismissed it as an accident. The shuriken was nowhere near their group and likely just the result of some careless ninja's training session. Still, Omoi's running commentary was enough to test even the most serene shinobi. "Will you shut up?" Karui snapped, throwing her teammate an irritated glare. Samui, true to form, continued to ignore them both, her calm demeanor unshaken. Mabui quietly admired her captain's ability to tune out nonsense, but Karui's outburst wasn't without merit. Omoi could be maddening. Mabui's instinct was to wait calmly for the weapon's owner to retrieve it, but the scene shifted before she could decide on anything further. A small boy burst onto the training ground, running toward them like he was being hunted by death itself. Blood streamed from his nose, his cheeks swollen and bruised. Mabui stood immediately, her posture tense as she approached the boy. He was clearly panicked, and if he noticed they were foreign ninja, he didn't seem to care. "What happened?" Mabui asked gently, her voice calm in an effort to soothe the boy's obvious terror. But he didn't respond. His eyes darted wildly, his breathing labored. His focus only settled when the sound of landing footsteps echoed behind him. Mabui turned her gaze to the new arrival. A man, a chunin by his vest, stepped forward with a faux smile plastered on his face. His expression might have fooled a less discerning observer, but Mabui could see the fury behind his eyes. It was repressed, barely contained, and no instructor had any right to look at a child that way. "Oh ho, it seems you found my wayward student," the man said, his false sincerity grating. Mabui didn't move as the boy instinctively darted behind her, clutching at the back of her top with trembling hands. He was too terrified to do much else. Her team remained still but watchful, waiting for her signal. The man continued, his voice smooth but brittle. "This one likes to skip class and spy on ninja, trying to learn cool techniques. It's my job to get him back to the academy. So if you would, hand him over." His gaze shifted briefly to the boy. "Come on, Konohamaru, we've wasted enough time, and any further delays will make your punishment worse." Mabui's mind worked quickly. The situation didn't sit right. An academy student wandering this far out unsupervised? The Chunins barely concealed anger? The likely connection between the man and the stray Fuma shuriken? It all painted a picture she didn't like. And judging by her team's body language, they'd reached the same conclusion. Karui's hands were twitching near her weapon, Omoi had gone quiet, always a bad sign, and even Samui's normally relaxed stance had sharpened slightly. Mabui's options were limited. As a moral being, she couldn't hand over a terrified child to a man who looked ready to snap. But as a kunoichi of Kyumo, she couldn't afford to provoke an incident with Konoha. Their villages were already walking a thin line of civility because of the exams, and any harm done to a Konoha ninja, even if justified, would irreparably harm relations between the two nations. But before Mabui could act, the situation took another turn. A blur of movement caught her attention, and then the gleam of a blade. It wasn't until the figure moved closer that Mabui recognized the orange hood and distinctive blonde hair of Uzumaki Naruto. She'd heard of him, of course, both from Kyumo's intelligence and her own rakish musings about the interesting brat. But this was the first time she'd seen him in action. Naruto wasted no time. He darted forward with precision, closing the distance to the Chunin in an instant. Mabui barely had time to process the scene before Naruto's kunai struck with a sharp, decisive blow. The flat of the blade cracked against the man's skull, sending him tumbling to the ground. Naruto followed up with a vicious kick to the throat, knocking the Chunin out cold. The boy, Konohamaru, didn't hesitate. As soon as the man fell, the boy sprinted toward Naruto, throwing himself into the older boy's arms. Naruto caught him easily, his expression softening as he crouched to speak to the child. Whatever he said must have been reassuring, as Konohamaru nodded quickly before a few of Naruto's ninken arrived. The dogs barked and wagged their tails as Naruto handed the boy off to one of them. Within moments, the dog and Konohamaru were gone, disappearing into the trees. Naruto turned his attention back to the unconscious Chunin. With practiced efficiency, he bound the man tightly, ensuring there was no chance of escape. He hauled the limp body onto his shoulders, the weight barely slowing him down. When his gaze finally shifted to Mabui, his sharp blue eyes locked onto hers. "Mabui-san," Naruto greeted politely, his voice calm but with a faint hint of exhaustion. Mabui blinked in mild surprise. "Uzumaki-san," she replied, inclining her head slightly. "You look nice today," Naruto said, his tone entirely earnest. The unexpected compliment caught Mabui off guard, and she felt a slight flush creep up her neck. She glanced at her team out of the corner of her eye, half expecting Karui to pounce on the moment. She quickly deflected. "Thank you, but this is just my standard outfit while on duty." Naruto tilted his head thoughtfully, as if considering her words. "Oh," he said after a pause. "Then you must look nice every day." Mabui froze, her composure momentarily cracking. Before she could respond, Naruto disappeared in a blur of movement, his ninken following close behind. The training ground fell silent once more. Karui snorted, the first to break the quiet. Was that flirting? From him? She sounded equal parts amused and baffled. "Shut it," Mabui muttered, fighting to regain her composure. Samui smirked faintly but said nothing, while Omoi, predictably, launched into an overdramatic tangent about how Naruto must be secretly plotting to infiltrate Kyumo by seducing Mabui. Mabui sighed deeply. It was going to be a long day. Sitting at her small table, sharing a pot of tea with Karen-chan, had become one of Haku's simple joys. Over the past few weeks, she'd grown to enjoy the young Uzumaki's company. Karen-chan had been closed off at first, understandable, considering what she'd been through, but with gentle prodding and plenty of patience, she had slowly begun to open up. It helped that the two of them had plenty to bond over, both were outsiders who had found a kind of solace in Naruto's orbit. If Karen seemed a little fixated on Naruto, well. Haku could hardly judge. She herself had devoted her life to Zabuza-sama with a similar intensity. The tea was warm, the atmosphere calm, and Karen was laughing at Chappie-kun, Haku's hard-working rabbit companion, as he nibbled on a treat. It was shaping up to be a quiet, pleasant afternoon, until a heavy knock at the door shattered the tranquility. Startled, Haku exchanged a glance with Karen before rising to answer. She wasn't expecting company. When she opened the door, her eyes widened at the sight before her. Konohamaru stood there, bloodied and bruised, flanked by 3 of Kakashi's summons. The boy's swollen cheeks and the clear panic in his eyes sent alarm bells ringing in Haku's mind. The largest of the dogs, Bull, stepped forward and gave her a quick rundown of the situation. Konohamaru had been abducted by a rogue chunin but had managed to escape, with Naruto stepping in to subdue the kidnapper. Haku took in the information silently, already ushering Konohamaru inside and guiding him to her couch. She could tell there was more to the story, something unspoken weighing on the boy. He barely muttered a greeting, wouldn't meet her eyes, and sat with his shoulders hunched in defeat. "Kono-kun," Haku said softly, crouching in front of him. "What's wrong?" Konohamaru's hands tightened into fists on his lap. He glanced quickly at Karen before looking away again, his body tense with indecision. Haku noticed the flicker of hesitation and gently offered, "That's Uzumaki Karen. She's going to be staying in Konoha for a while." Konohamaru's head snapped up, his curiosity momentarily overriding his distress. "Niken has a clansman?" he asked in wonder. Haku nodded. "They met during the Chunin exams. I'm sure she'd tell you the story if you're interested." "Sure would," Karen chimed in with a small smile, trying to put the boy at ease. "But why don't I give you two some privacy for now?" Konohamaru shook his head quickly. "No. Niken would say it's rude to make your guest leave because I showed up," he mumbled. Haku gave him a reassuring look. "I think he'd understand, given the circumstances. But if you're comfortable talking with Karen-chan here, that's okay too." The boy hesitated again, then lowered his head, his small body starting to tremble. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with shame. I did everything wrong. I was so scared. I dropped Niken's dagger, and I would have been killed if I didn't trip on a tree root. He wouldn't have been too afraid to even think. I'm a coward," he cried, his voice breaking. Haku's heart ached at the sight of him. Gently, she reached out and tilted his head up so their eyes met. "Konohamaru," she said firmly but kindly, "being afraid doesn't make you a coward. And comparing yourself to Naruto-kun isn't fair. Neither of us knows how he would have handled this when he was your age." The boy didn't respond, but the tears pooling in his eyes spoke volumes. "What I do know," Haku continued, her voice steady and soothing, "is that a chunin tricked you, betrayed you, and abducted you. His goal was to escape with you. Your goal was to get away. You're here now, and he's been captured. That's a win, Kono-kun." "But I didn't do anything," Konohamaru whispered, his voice cracking. "You escaped. You stalled him. I'm assuming Naruto-kun gave you something to signal him if you were in danger, and you used it. You did everything that could be expected of you, Kono-kun." The boy's lip trembled. "Then why do I feel like a failure?" "Because fear can make us feel weak and small," Haku said gently. "All the stories we hear about courage talk about overcoming fear, but surviving, enduring, takes its own kind of strength. And for Shinobi, survival is everything. Sometimes it's sheer dumb luck. We can't control luck, but that's why we train. Being faster, stronger, smarter doesn't guarantee victory, but it tips the odds in your favor. But even then, you should never think there's such a thing as an absolute victory. That chunin thought he was unbeatable. Now look at him, defeated by an academy student." Konohamaru sniffled, his expression softening into something like hope. Niken, his goal was to abduct you. Yours was to escape. When ninja fight, the one who achieves their goal is the winner, and the one who doesn't is the loser. This was your win, Konohamaru. Do you understand? Slowly, the boy nodded, a hesitant smile creeping onto his face. Haku smiled back and left to retrieve her first aid kit. When she returned, she found Konohamaru sound asleep on the couch, his small frame curled up as if the weight of his fear had finally lifted. Chappie-kun was perched loyally on his chest, watching over him with twitching ears. Haku placed a blanket over the boy and sat down next to Karen, who had been quietly observing. "He'll be okay," Haku said softly. Karen nodded. "He's tough. Stubborn, too. Just like an Uzumaki." In a darkened room elsewhere in the village, Commander Dragon was preparing for his own conversation with the would-be kidnapper. Stalking around the surgical suite, he reviewed the tools he'd need for the interrogation. As the ANBU commander, he prided himself on efficiency, and while he wasn't thrilled to waste time on a fool like Mizuki, he was nothing if not thorough. 3 sharp slaps woke the man from his unconscious state. Mizuki blinked blearily, his eyes adjusting to the harsh spotlight shining directly on him. He tried to squirm, but his limbs wouldn't obey. When his gaze finally landed on the mask of the ANBU commander, all defiance drained from his face, replaced by bone-deep fear. "Understand one thing, Onion," Dragon began coldly. "I'm a busy man. If I'm not asking you a question, you are not to speak. Are we clear?" Mizuki frowned but nodded, earning himself another slap. "When I ask an onion a question, I expect a verbal response," Dragon said evenly. "Why yes," Mizuki stammered. "Good." Dragon pulled a pristine white towel from a nearby stand, holding it up for Mizuki to see. "This is a 600 thread count towel. I'm going to wet one end and force it down your throat," Mizuki broke, his voice cracking in panic. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything." Dragon smiled behind his mask. Another onion peeled. Naruto, newly promoted to Chunin, meeting with members of his father's old guardian platoon, Genma, Reito, and Iwashi, who have arrived with Kakashi. Naruto learns that these 3 were close to his father, Minato, and are delighted to take on the role of his fun uncles, eager to celebrate his promotion. But as they get carried away with plans for a party, Kakashi steps in, reminding them that there's a Team 7 tradition he has to uphold first. Outside, Naruto asks Kakashi if they can make a quick stop to visit his friend Konohamaru before their tradition begins. Kakashi agrees, and they head over to Konohamaru's place. As soon as they arrive, Konohamaru launches himself at Naruto with surprising intensity, his face troubled. It turns out that the young boy has a question burning in his mind, a question no one expected. "Ni-chan, are you the Kyuubi?" he asks, looking up at Naruto with a mix of fear and curiosity. Kakashi realizes immediately what must have happened. Someone, likely the traitorous Mizuki, has maliciously told Konohamaru about Naruto's connection to the Nine Tails. Kakashi watches, tense and uncertain about how Naruto will respond to such a loaded question. But Naruto, to his credit, takes it in stride, choosing humor over denial. "I would seem to lack the requisite tails, Kono-chan," he replies with a small, teasing smile. The joke lands, and Konohamaru relaxes, whining affectionately at Naruto's playfulness. Kakashi, seeing the gravity of the situation, suggests they take the conversation inside, where Naruto finally addresses the truth. He explains that while he isn't the Nine Tails itself, it was sealed within him by his father, the Yondaime Hokage, when he was just a baby. Konohamaru, perhaps still too young to grasp the full weight of it all, takes this in stride, asking innocent questions. He even wonders aloud if Naruto has ever met the Nine Tails face to face. Naruto admits that he has, describing the fox's ferocious appearance in a light-hearted way that once again diffuses the tension. The real revelation here, though, is Naruto's remarkable composure. Rather than shrinking from this dark secret or resenting it, he treats it like a curious part of his life that he's come to accept. Even Haku, who is listening quietly nearby, seems touched by the way Naruto carries this burden so lightly. She smiles warmly at him as she prepares to escort Konohamaru back to the Sarutobi compound, clearly grateful for his resilience and care. With that delicate matter handled, Naruto and Kakashi move on to the traditional, Chunin promotion ritual Kakashi hinted at earlier. They head to an old training ground, where Kakashi pulls out a single bell, a nod to the very first exercise Team 7 did together. He explains that when someone on the team gets promoted, they redo the infamous bell test, but this time it's just the two of them. Kakashi tells Naruto to come at him with the intent to kill and gives him a 2-hour limit to snatch and keep the bell. Without a word, Naruto answers by launching a kunai straight at Kakashi, who barely manages to dodge it before Naruto disappears from sight. Kakashi smirks to himself, impressed and ready for a good fight. This isn't just a test anymore, it's a chance for him to see how much his student has grown and for Naruto to prove, once again, that he's not just the little prankster who used to struggle to keep up with his team. This is Naruto, the Chunin, proud, resilient, and ready to show the world what he's capable of. Sakura found herself in an unexpected situation, sitting across from one of the village's most powerful elders, Hamura Koharu. The meeting itself was surprising enough. She'd never expected to be called in by an advisor to the Hokage, but the conversation was even more bewildering. Koharu's sharp eyes appraised her, and Sakura felt as if her very thoughts were being read, each layer of her young, uncertain mind peeled back and examined. It started innocently enough, with Koharu complimenting her on her place in Team 7, specifically mentioning her teammates, Sasuke, the last of the Uchiha, and Naruto, the son of the Yondaime. But Sakura barely had a chance to respond before Koharu made an unexpected offer. She would tutor Sakura, teach her the nuances of soft power, the sort of influence that operated subtly, behind the scenes. It was tempting, but Sakura knew better than to accept without asking what the elder woman would want in return. Koharu handed Sakura a folder filled with photos. One by one, she looked at them, confused. They were all images of Naruto, surrounded by different women, some familiar, like Hinata, Ino, and Haku, and others she'd only heard about, like the legendary Senju Tsunade and a kunoichi from Kyumo. There was even a shot of the Suna Shinobi, Tamari. The theme was clear enough, but Sakura couldn't make sense of why Koharu was showing her this. Koharu explained that there was an old legend among Konoha's elite, a prophecy whispered through the ranks since the time of the Shodai Hokage. This gentleman was said to be a shinobi with a natural gift for charm, one who could captivate and attract kunoichi effortlessly. Over the years, various powerful women in the village had made it their mission to prevent such a figure from emerging, seeing it as a dangerous influence that could disrupt the order they'd carefully cultivated. If any shinobi showed signs of fitting the prophecy, a skilled kunoichi would be placed in his life to anchor him, to prevent him from becoming that legendary playboy. And now, to her astonishment, Koharu revealed that Naruto might be that very figure. Sakura was flabbergasted. Naruto? The gentleman? It was so far removed from the way she'd always seen him. She stammered, asking if Koharu wanted her to date him, which earned a soft, measured laugh from the elder. Koharu clarified that she didn't want Sakura to pursue Naruto romantically. Rather, she wanted her to take on the role of an older sister, a steady influence who could subtly guide him away from the path of the gentleman and toward a more respectable future. Sakura was hesitant. She wasn't particularly close to Naruto, not in the way Koharu seemed to think she was capable of being. Sure, she'd come to respect him after the exams, seeing a strength and resilience in him she hadn't fully appreciated before, but they were still worlds apart. And besides, wasn't Hinata already there for him? Everyone knew how she felt about Naruto. But Koharu had anticipated this question. She explained that, while Hinata clearly admired Naruto, she was already under his sway and unlikely to serve as a grounding influence. In fact, the elder speculated that other girls, like Ino, might also be vulnerable to Naruto's unexpected charm. Koharu had originally intended for a different kunoichi to serve as Naruto's steadying influence, someone older who had once served as his guard. But, for reasons she didn't explain, that plan was no longer viable. Koharu needed someone else, and that someone, she had decided, was Sakura. The elder's words weighed heavily on Sakura. She had never thought of herself as an anchor for someone like Naruto. She was just trying to keep up with Sasuke, to find her own strength, to prove herself as a kunoichi. Yet here was Koharu-sama, speaking of her potential to influence one of Konoha's most important, and complicated, shinobi. Sakura couldn't deny that the offer was enticing. She was being given a chance to be taken seriously, to gain guidance from one of the most experienced shinobi in the village. And, in her heart, a small part of her did want to help Naruto, to repay him for the times he'd been there for her, even when she'd been too focused on Sasuke to notice. After a long pause, she looked up at Koharu, her voice steadier than before. "Yes, I will," she said, accepting the task. Koharu's sharp gaze softened, just a bit, and she nodded approvingly. This was the beginning of a new responsibility for Sakura, one that was entirely different from the combat training she'd known, a challenge not of weapons or jutsu, but of influence, diplomacy, and quiet strength. The elder's approval felt like the weight of a new world settling on her shoulders, and Sakura knew that she would have to tread carefully, for Naruto's sake, and perhaps even for Konoha's. As the silence finally settled in her room, Tamari lay there, completely still, her mind racing even as her heart beat furiously against her ribcage. She replayed the encounter in her mind, almost as if trying to convince herself that it had really happened, that she hadn't just imagined the three kunoichi appearing out of the shadows, one by one, each more terrifying than the last. Enko Mitarashi, the proctor with the feral grin and wild eyes, had been the first. Tamari's stomach still stung where Anko's kunai had pressed just deep enough to break the skin, a subtle, deliberate reminder of how easily her life could have been snuffed out. Anko's voice, that sickly sweet nickname, Cookie, echoed in her mind, like a haunting melody she couldn't shake. And then there was Nai-chan, the calm, collected woman who had emerged from the shadows with a voice like velvet and a gaze that saw right through her. But the real fear had hit when Tsunade appeared. Tamari had heard all the stories. Even in Suna, tales of Tsunade Senju's monstrous strength and mastery of medical ninjutsu were legendary. But hearing stories and standing in front of the woman were two very different things. The ease with which she'd threatened to turn Tamari's insides to liquid had been delivered with such chilling calm that Tamari knew, without a doubt, it wasn't an idle threat. She had never felt so small, so powerless, not even under Gaara's killing intent. But what struck her most wasn't just the fear. It was the knowledge that these three women, all powerful in their own right, were united by a single purpose, to protect Naruto. A boy Tamari had once dismissed as an idiot, a loud-mouthed nuisance from a foreign village. But here he was, the center of this secretive, deadly network of protectors who would go to unimaginable lengths to ensure his safety. It made her stomach churn with something other than fear, something that felt suspiciously like admiration. "What is it about you, Naruto Uzumaki?" she wondered. "How did you earn this kind of loyalty?" Tamari sank back onto her pillow, breathing deeply in an attempt to calm herself. She should have been appalled, terrified, furious even. The nerve of these women, slipping into her room in the middle of the night to interrogate her over a boy. A boy. But as she lay there, she couldn't deny the strange thrill that lingered just beneath the surface of her skin. Maybe it was the danger of it all, the way Enko had pressed the kunai against her without hesitation, the sheer intensity of their protectiveness. For someone like her, who'd been raised on the brutal sands of Suna, there was something enticing about it. She covered her face with her hands, groaning softly. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. She'd come to Konoha as an ambassador, a shinobi of Suna, her focus meant to be on her duties, on maintaining peace between their villages, and keeping an eye on Gaara during the exams. She wasn't supposed to be lying in bed, heart pounding, thinking about Naruto. But it was impossible to ignore the impact he'd had on her, almost without her realizing it. Naruto was unlike anyone she'd ever met, stubborn, kind-hearted, completely unpretentious. He was reckless and brash, but he'd shown a courage that had forced even her to respect him. And now, the thought that he had people like Anko, Kurenai, and Tsunade watching over him made her realize just how much she'd underestimated him. Maybe she wasn't the only one. With a sigh, Tamari rolled onto her side, hugging her pillow. It felt as if some invisible line had been drawn in the sand tonight, as if she'd crossed a threshold and there was no going back. She was already too close to him, too invested. And if she kept going, she might just get herself tangled up in Konoha's strange, dangerous web. But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she wanted to pull back. If anything, the encounter with Naruto's guardians only made her more curious, more intrigued. Somehow, the quiet resolve she felt now scared her even more than Anko's kunai or Tsunade's threat. It was as if she'd made a decision she hadn't fully acknowledged yet, a choice that was slowly rooting itself in her mind, whether she wanted it to or not. Tamari closed her eyes, letting herself drift off again. Her last thought was one she barely dared admit, even to herself. Maybe he really is worth the risk. Naruto, swaying slightly in cheeks flushed from the potent mix of drinks he'd been forced to down, stumbled up to the gates of the Hyuga compound. Tonight had been a celebration unlike any he'd ever experienced, a whirlwind of laughter, camaraderie, and the kind of hazy joy that only came from too many habanero death shots shared with his dad's old guard. But in the midst of it all, he'd felt something missing, a quiet ache he couldn't shake, even as Genma and Reito clapped him on the back and Anko called him a proper shinobi for holding his liquor. And in his foggy mind, he'd figured it out, he wanted to see Hinata. So here he was, loudly demanding an audience with her in the dead of night, much to the amusement of the Hyuga guards. The man who finally came to address him wasn't Hinata, though, but her father, Hayashi Hyuga. Naruto blinked up at the dignified, impassive man, swaying slightly as he tried to figure out why someone as serious as Hayashi would be here instead of Hinata herself. Hayashi, ever composed, listened as Naruto struggled to explain himself, his words tumbling out in slurred, earnest fragments about wanting to see Hinata. But then the Hyuga head made a request that Naruto hadn't been expecting, a request that would sober him up faster than any bitter remedy. Hayashi asked him to stay away from Hinata until after the Chunin exam finals. He wanted his daughter to prove herself without the comfort of Naruto's presence, to show that her strength was her own, that her accomplishments were not reliant on her friendship with him. Naruto, struggling to focus, felt a surge of protest well up in him. He didn't want to agree, 2 weeks without seeing Hinata suddenly felt like an eternity. He didn't quite understand why, but the thought of staying away from her made his heart sink in a way he hadn't expected. Still, Hayashi's reasoning held weight, and the young man in him, the newly minted Chunin who wanted to be worthy of his title, understood the value of Hayashi's request. So, reluctantly, he agreed. As he turned to leave with Kakashi, he silently promised himself that after the exams, he'd make sure nothing kept him from his best friend again. The day of the Chunin exam finals dawned, and Konoha was buzzing with excitement. The stadium was packed, the air thick with anticipation as villagers and visiting dignitaries filled the stands. For most, this was a spectacle, a chance to witness the strength of the village's next generation. But for others, the stakes were much higher. For the Yondaime Kazekage, Raza, the journey to Konoha had been a grueling exercise in restraint. His original plans, his carefully orchestrated invasion alongside Orochimaru, had crumbled spectacularly. The news had come in the form of a panicked message from Baki, his most trusted jonin, informing him that their entire scheme had been discovered and that the Suna contingent was effectively trapped. It had been Naruto Uzumaki, a genin, of all things, who'd somehow managed to capture Orochimaru himself, and single-handedly dismantle their plans. Raza still found it difficult to believe. He'd known Naruto was the son of the Yondaime Hokage, the legendary Minato Namikaze, but even so, he had assumed the boy was just another loud-mouthed brat with nothing but his father's name to his credit. Now, he knew better. This genin had humiliated his village's forces, captured his most dangerous ally, and held his own children as hostages, all without so much as a whisper of his existence in any of Suna's intelligence reports. And now Raza was being forced to walk into the very heart of Konoha with his hands effectively tied, escorted by 2 of the Sannin and an elite squad of ANBU, as if he were a prisoner rather than an ally. His children were still in Konoha, but he'd been barred from seeing them, and Baki was nowhere to be found. He wouldn't even know his children's condition until they stepped into the arena. The rage simmering in his veins was barely kept in check, his mind clouded with images of his children's potential suffering, each worse than the last. As much as he was Kazekage, a leader sworn to put his village first, he was still a father. And if he had to, he would burn his way through Konoha's defenses to get his children back. Sitting in the grandstand beside the Hokage's empty seat, Raza clenched his fists, feeling trapped and caged. He had to play the part of the diplomat, smiling and bowing, but every fiber of his being screamed to act. He was supposed to be here as an honored guest, but Konoha had made it clear that he was under constant watch, that his every move was being scrutinized by eyes as sharp as kunai. The Hokage's arrival only sharpened the tension. Sarutobi Hiruzen took his place beside him, the aged yet formidable leader's expression unreadable as he acknowledged Raza with a curt nod. The 2 Kage exchanged formal greetings, each polite but hollow, and Raza could feel the unspoken warning in the old man's gaze. Konoha might have agreed to host this exam, to extend a fragile hand of peace, but there was no mistaking the reality. He was being watched, and one wrong move would bring the full wrath of Konoha upon him. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the arena, signaling the start of the matches. The crowds fell silent, their excitement palpable as the first match was announced. Raza's breath caught when he saw his daughter, Tamari, enter the arena, her face as fierce and unyielding as the desert wind she commanded. He felt a pang of both pride and fear, pride in her strength, fear for her safety. And then he saw him, sitting just a few rows up in the stands, Naruto Uzumaki, watching with keen eyes, his gaze locked onto the field with a focus that seemed almost unnatural. Raza's fists clenched tighter. That boy, that was the reason for all of this. A mere genin, an outlier whose unpredictability had thrown the Sand Village's entire strategy into chaos. He could sense that Naruto was more than he appeared, something dangerous and unknowable hidden beneath that seemingly open smile and bright, blue eyes. The thought made his skin prickle. He didn't know what Naruto was capable of, but he knew enough to tread carefully. As Tamari's match began, Raza tried to keep his focus on his daughter, on her skillful use of wind jutsu and the strength she'd honed over years of training. But his gaze kept drifting back to Naruto, wondering just what this boy was, and how he'd managed to turn an entire village's plans inside out without anyone realizing his potential. Perhaps, Raza thought grimly, we underestimated him not because of his skill, but because we underestimated his ability to inspire others to protect him. He thought of the Sannin who had met him at the border, the legendary medic Tsunade and the toad sage Jiraiya, who had both watched him with eyes that left no doubt about the seriousness of their intent. Naruto, he realized with a pang of bitterness, wasn't just a genin. He was a symbol, someone who embodied Konoha's greatest strength, their loyalty, their unity, the way they would close ranks around one of their own, no matter the cost. As the match below continued, Raza felt his resolve hardening, his heart settling with grim determination. He would see his children through this day. He would play Konoha's game, and he would play it well. But he knew one thing for certain, he would never again underestimate Naruto Uzumaki. That boy was a storm on the horizon, and Raza could only pray that when it hit, his village would be ready. In a secure room deep within the stadium, Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, waited patiently as his ANBU completed their final security checks. The Chunin exam finals were about to begin, and he wanted to ensure every potential threat was accounted for. In times past, this sort of preparation might have seemed unnecessary. Konoha, after all, was secure under his watch. But today was different. With the Kazekage himself in attendance, the stakes were higher than ever, and Hiruzen had no intention of letting his guard down. Danzo Shimura stood by his side, his expression as unreadable as always. But there was a tension to him today, a sharpness in his gaze as he studied the Hokage. Hiruzen didn't have to guess what was on Danzo's mind, he could almost feel the man's simmering disapproval, the unspoken critiques of Hiruzen's leadership choices and the subtle maneuverings of a man who always saw weakness where Hiruzen saw mercy. Finally, Danzo broke the silence, his voice low and edged with something that might almost have been concern. "You know you can't kill him, right?" Hiruzen chuckled to himself, barely able to suppress an eye roll. He knew what Danzo was getting at, the logistics, the politics. Yes, it would be inopportune to kill Raza, the Kazekage of Suna, especially here, with the eyes of the village upon him. It would unravel the tenuous peace between their villages, throw everything into chaos, and potentially bring war to their doorstep. But Hiruzen was getting tired of being reminded of what he could or couldn't do in his own village. He glanced over at Danzo with a faint smile, a touch of the old spark in his eyes. "Of course I can kill him, Danzo," he said lightly. "This is my village. If the Kazekage has ill intentions, I will do whatever is necessary to protect Konoha. And, for the record, I'd look damn good doing it." The faintest twitch of irritation crossed Danzo's face, and Hiruzen savored the reaction. For a moment, they were young again, two rivals, two shinobi with entirely different visions for the future of the Leaf, sparring not with weapons but with words. Danzo, the pragmatist, the relentless shadow who would do anything, sacrifice anything, for Konoha's security. And Hiruzen, the protector, the guiding light who believed in the strength of compassion and unity as much as he believed in the strength of his own hands. "You're being petulant, Hiruzen," Danzo muttered. "I haven't said anything," Hiruzen replied, a hint of mischief in his voice. "No," Danzo admitted, "but you're thinking very loudly." His mouth twisted into a grimace, though Hiruzen could almost swear he saw a flicker of amusement in his old rival's eye. Yes, you could kill Raza. You'd even look impressive doing it, if that's what it takes to soothe your ego." Hiruzen nodded, pretending to consider this seriously. "Good. Glad we're in agreement." Danzo's shoulders slumped in exasperation, and Hiruzen felt a surge of satisfaction, small, childish, but sweet nonetheless. It wasn't often that he got to ruffle Danzo's feathers these days. "You're my penance," Danzo said, shaking his head. Hiruzen scoffed. "If I give you even half the headaches in our golden years that you gave me in our prime, you should consider yourself lucky." Danzo turned, giving him a sidelong glare, but there was something like a resigned fondness in his expression. "If I weren't too tired to hate, I'd hate you with the entirety of my being," he said, voice dry as desert sand. Hiruzen grinned. "Ah, but where would the village be without our legendary partnership, Danzo? After all, I am the noble Hokage, and you, well, you're the thorn in my side that keeps me sharp." Danzo snorted, but Hiruzen thought he caught the faintest glint of amusement in his eyes. It was rare, these days, to see anything beyond cold calculation in Danzo's gaze. For a brief moment, it felt like they were boys again, students of Tobarama Senju, dreaming of the village they'd protect, though neither of them could have foreseen the sacrifices they'd each make to carry that dream. "Come watch the future protectors of our village," Hiruzen said, gesturing toward the viewing platform. "It'll be invigorating." Danzo glanced at him, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. For a moment, Hiruzen wondered if he would refuse. But then Danzo gave a short nod, falling into step beside him as they moved to take their places in the stands. The hum of the crowd grew louder as they emerged into the open air. Thousands of villagers gathered to witness the battles that would decide the next generation of Chunin. Hiruzen took his seat, his eyes scanning the stadium. He spotted Naruto among the crowd, the boy already looking eager and animated, his face a mixture of determination and uncontainable excitement. The sight made Hiruzen's heart swell with pride. Here was Minato's son, the vessel of the Nine Tails, a boy who had grown up shunned and underestimated, but who had proven himself over and over again. Hiruzen saw in him the embodiment of Konoha's spirit, unbreakable, hopeful, and fierce. That boy, Danzo murmured, his gaze following Hiruzen's. You place a lot of faith in him. Hiruzen didn't look away from Naruto. It's not just faith, Danzo. I see the potential in him, the strength of his spirit, the depth of his loyalty. He's more than Minato's legacy. He's something else. Something this village hasn't seen in a long time. Danzo made a non-committal sound, but Hiruzen knew him well enough to sense his discomfort. Danzo had always been wary of the unpredictable, the uncontrollable. And Naruto, with his boundless energy and relentless optimism, was as unpredictable as they came. The future of Konoha isn't built on shadows, Danzo, Hiruzen said softly, his eyes never leaving Naruto. It's built on those who stand in the light. Danzo said nothing, his gaze shifting back to the arena where the matches were about to begin. His silence was as close to a concession as Hiruzen would ever get, and that was enough. As the crowd roared and the first match was announced, Hiruzen allowed himself a brief, quiet smile. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever dangers threatened their peace, he believed in Konoha's future. He believed in the next generation. And he knew, deep down, that they would carry on. The will of fire, no matter how dark the path became. But, just in case, he rested a hand on the hilt of his staff, the ancient weapon Tobirama had gifted him all those years ago. He might be old, but he was not yet ready to fade away. If anyone dared threaten the village today, whether it be Raza, Orochimaru, or some other hidden foe, they would find that the third Hokage was as deadly as ever. And, should it come to that, Hiruzen was certain he would look damn good doing it. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation, the murmurs and gasps rising like a wave as Rock Lee and Hinata Hyuga took their places across from each other in the arena. This was the first match of the finals, and everyone was eager to see what these two would bring to the battlefield. The Hokage's ceremonial opening had set the tone, and now the village held its collective breath, watching as Konoha's future fought to prove themselves. Lee, ever the picture of boundless energy, was already bouncing on his toes, his gaze laser-focused on his opponent. He was as ready as he'd ever be. His sensei, Guy, had urged him to remove his weights for this match, a rare decision that emphasized just how much faith Guy had in Lee's ability to take this battle seriously. Lee had no talent for ninjutsu or genjutsu, but he had something else: grit, discipline, and unshakable confidence in his taijutsu. Against most opponents, that was all he needed. But as he faced Hinata, something gave him pause. She was calm, almost serene, her stance loose yet disciplined, her face betraying no hint of nerves or hesitation. Lee had trained with her cousin, Niji, and was intimately familiar with the merciless power of the Hyuga clan's gentle fist. He knew to be cautious. But Hinata was different from Niji, less ruthless, less rigid. Lee had thought, perhaps naively, that her hesitancy might give him an edge. The moment the proctor gave the signal, Lee burst forward, his speed blurring him into motion as he aimed a sweeping kick at her legs. But Hinata sidestepped, rolling off his back with a lightness that surprised him. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, and before he could blink, she was back on the offensive, her hand darting forward in a swift, surgical strike aimed at his chest. Lee barely managed to dodge, his reflexes kicking in before his mind could process what had happened. He spun to face her, narrowly avoiding the heel of her foot as she aimed a swift kick toward his head. He had expected her to be defensive, to rely solely on blocking and redirection, but Hinata was meeting his attacks head-on, her strikes sharper, more aggressive than he'd ever seen in their brief interactions around the training grounds. He fell back, quickly reassessing, and for a few heartbeats they stood there, watching each other, sizing each other up. Lee realized that he'd miscalculated. This was not the shy, timid Hinata he remembered. This was someone else entirely, someone who had clearly put in countless hours of training to hone her skills. She was confident, steady, and not at all overwhelmed by his speed. Lee's mind raced. If I rush her again, she'll just counter, he thought, as he rubbed his knee, still throbbing from the oblique kick she'd landed earlier. Her stance is deceptive, she's balanced, keeping me at range, and her timing. He couldn't afford to stay on the defensive. That was a sure way to let her pick him apart, one gentle fist strike at a time. But he had a sense that his usual straightforward attacks wouldn't work here. She was reading him, adapting to his movements in a way that reminded him of Niji. The crowd was murmuring, watching, waiting for his next move, but Lee tuned them out, focusing on the fight. With a deep breath, he adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders and bracing his feet. If he was going to get past her defenses, he'd have to go all out. His eyes sharpened with determination as he channeled the teachings of his beloved sensei, letting his spirit and focus build to a razor's edge. Hinata seemed to sense his resolve. Her pale, pupil-less eyes narrowed slightly, and her body shifted ever so subtly into a more defensive stance, her hands raised and ready to counter. She was calm, but not careless. Lee could tell she was prepared for whatever he was about to throw at her. He charged again, his form a green blur, moving with the kind of blinding speed that had given him an edge against so many other opponents. But this time, he fainted low, just as he saw her hands shift to intercept. In that split second, he twisted mid-movement, bringing his right fist around in an arc toward her shoulder, a move designed to knock her off balance rather than injure. Hinata reacted instantly, dropping her stance and leaning back just enough to dodge his punch. But Lee was ready. He'd anticipated her dodge, and he immediately spun into a sweeping kick aimed at her legs. This time, she couldn't avoid it entirely, she stumbled back as his foot clipped her shin, forcing her to shift her weight awkwardly. He pressed the advantage, moving in close to prevent her from regaining her stance. But just as he was about to launch another strike, he felt a sharp, precise jab to his forearm, an unexpected counter. His arm went numb for a second, the telltale sign of a gentle fist strike targeting his chakra network. He grimaced, pulling back to shake off the sensation, but she was already moving, her movements like flowing water, pressing her advantage with quick, punishing strikes that forced him to stay on the defensive. The crowd gasped as they watched the exchange, each blow and dodge a testament to the level of skill both genin had reached. The match was quickly becoming more than just a test of strength, it was a dance of reflexes, a battle of wills. And Lee, for all his boundless energy, was realizing that this battle would require more than just speed or strength. He took a breath, watching Hinata with renewed respect. She was graceful, precise, and her technique was flawless. But what struck him most was her resolve. The timid girl he thought he knew was gone, replaced by someone fierce, someone unshakable. She'd grown, and he could see that clearly now. From the stands, Guy watched with a proud but serious expression, his arms crossed over his chest as he observed his student's struggle. Lee had come far, but this match was showing him something he hadn't yet faced, an opponent who wasn't just strong, but adaptable, and with a conviction of her own. Next to Guy, Niji watched his cousin with surprise, a faint smile on his usually stoic face. It was clear that Hinata had impressed him, too. Lee adjusted his stance once more, taking a deep breath. He couldn't treat this like any other match. If he was going to win, he would need to dig deeper, to go beyond the limits he'd set for himself. With a determined look in his eyes, he addressed her, his voice filled with admiration and excitement. "Hinata-san, you are truly strong. I will not hold back any longer. Please prepare yourself." Hinata's expression softened for a moment, a small, almost shy smile crossing her face. She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Lee-san. I look forward to it." And with that, Lee sprang forward, faster, fiercer than before, his every movement a testament to his dedication, his drive. He was no longer underestimating her, he was treating her as a true equal, an opponent worthy of his best efforts. And Hinata, in turn, met him head-on, her own movements sharper, her gaze unwavering. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the display, the raw passion of these two fighters. This wasn't just a fight, it was a meeting of souls, a battle that would test not only their bodies but the essence of who they were. And as they clashed in the center of the arena, their spirits shining as brightly as their will to win, it was clear to everyone watching, this was the future of Konoha. Hayashi watched the match unfold with a mixture of pride and apprehension, his Byakugan keenly tracking every movement between Hinata and Rock Lee. He could see the toll the fight was taking on Lee, the subtle bruises from her strikes, the way his stance shifted under the accumulated fatigue of her relentless palm thrusts. She was wearing him down, her skillful application of the gentle fist precise and unyielding, each strike disrupting his chakra network in ways that would drain even the hardiest of opponents. The crowd's cheers swelled around him, and Hayashi allowed himself a brief moment of pride, his heart swelling as they roared for his daughter. Hinata had come so far, further than he'd ever allowed himself to hope. He'd once thought her path was doomed to be one of quiet disappointment, too gentle and too timid for the harsh demands of the Hyuga clan's ways. But he'd been wrong. His teachings had failed her, and her true strength had blossomed only when she'd begun forging her own path. In the arena, Hinata moved with a fluidity and confidence that had been unimaginable a few years ago. She was focused, her strikes precise, her stance balanced. She was winning, he realized, truly winning against one of Konoha's most relentless genin. It was clear to him now that Hinata was ready to stand on her own. Perhaps, he thought with a hopeful flicker, she was even ready for promotion. But his thoughts were cut short by a sudden cry from the arena, a gasp from Hinata as she faltered mid-air. Hayashi's gaze sharpened, Byakugan eyes focusing as he caught the telltale surge of chakra within Rock Lee. The boy had opened the first gate. No! Hayashi's heart clenched as he saw the shift, the sudden explosion of speed and strength that transformed Lee into a blur of motion. He watched, helpless, as Lee's kick struck Hinata mid-air, a brutal impact that sent her tumbling backward. He saw her ribs crack, saw the pain that blossomed across her face even as she fought to maintain her stance. She struggled, her breathing ragged, as Lee came at her again, landing two powerful body blows that left her staggering. Hayashi's hands clenched into fists, his stoic composure cracking as he watched his daughter reel from the force of Lee's strikes. All thoughts of promotion, of victory, faded from his mind. She was hurt, and every instinct in him screamed to intervene, to protect her from further harm. But he was bound by the rules, by the unspoken code of Konoha's shinobi. This was her fight. He could only watch and hope she'd find a way to endure. In the arena, Hinata was visibly struggling. Her breathing was labored, each inhale sending a spike of pain through her chest, her broken ribs protesting with every movement. But her eyes remained steady, her gaze fixed on her opponent. She willed herself to stand, her legs shaking slightly as she tried to block out the pain, her focus narrowing to a single, razor-sharp point. This wasn't just a match anymore, it was a test of her resilience, of her will to fight despite the odds stacked against her. From the sidelines, her sensei Kurenai watched with concern etched across her face, hands pressed to her mouth as she silently urged Hinata to hold on. Even Niji, usually indifferent to his cousin's struggles, watched with a faint furrow of his brow, a hint of something like respect flashing in his eyes. Hinata's strength, her courage, was undeniable. She'd come so far, and it was clear to everyone watching that she was no longer the timid girl hiding in the shadows. Lee, too, had paused, his breathing heavy as he took in Hinata's battered form. His expression was conflicted. He'd gone all out in the spirit of competition, but he hadn't meant to hurt her so severely. Still, he could see the determination blazing in her eyes, the unspoken refusal to give up. "Hinata-san," he called out, a note of respect in his voice. "You are truly formidable. I will not hold back any longer." Hinata nodded, her gaze unwavering. She shifted her stance, her arms raised, prepared to face whatever came next. Despite the pain, despite the fatigue, she wasn't backing down. For a moment, her eyes lifted to the stands, catching sight of her father's face, his expression tight with worry. And in that moment, something changed in her gaze, a flash of resolve, of pride. She was doing this not just for herself, but to prove her worth to him, to show him that she could stand on her own. Lee's next move was fast, faster than anything the crowd had seen before. He blurred forward, aiming a series of rapid punches at her torso, hoping to end the match quickly. But Hinata's Byakugan tracked his every movement, and despite her injuries, she twisted and spun, her hands deflecting his strikes with a grace that seemed almost ethereal. She moved in closer than he expected, and struck at his shoulder with a fierce, controlled burst of chakra. Lee staggered back, his arm going limp as she temporarily disrupted the flow of chakra to his muscles. He gritted his teeth, adjusting his stance, but he was clearly feeling the effects of her gentle fist. Each of her strikes was taking a toll, his movements growing slower, more labored as his chakra network became more and more disrupted. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, enraptured by the display of skill, strength, and sheer determination from both fighters. This was no ordinary Chunin exam match, it was a clash of wills, a battle of spirit that neither could afford to lose. Hayashi watched, his heart pounding, as Hinata pressed on despite her injuries, despite the odds. Her movements were slower now, her breaths shallow, but she didn't falter. For the first time, he saw not just his daughter, but a true shinobi, a warrior who would face any challenge, endure any pain, if it meant achieving her goal. With a final burst of energy, Lee charged again, his fist arcing towards her in a decisive blow. But Hinata moved like water, flowing around him, her hand grazing his side as she delivered a final, precise strike. Lee staggered, his footing faltering, and for a moment it looked as if he might fall. Then, in the silence that followed, he dropped to one knee, breathing heavily as he held up a hand in surrender. "I yield," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Hinata-san, you are stronger than I ever imagined." The proctor called the match, and the stadium erupted into cheers, the sound washing over them like a wave. Hinata stood there, swaying slightly, her hand pressed to her ribs, but her face was lit with a quiet, exhausted smile. She had done it. She had proven herself, not just to the crowd, but to herself, and to her father. In the stands, Hayashi released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his eyes softening as he watched her. Pride filled him, a pride he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. She had fought not with his techniques, but with her own, and she had emerged victorious. She was her own person, her own shinobi, and he finally understood that she was someone to be reckoned with, someone to respect. As Hinata left the arena, she looked up at him once more, and this time, Hayashi gave her a small nod, his expression uncharacteristically warm. She had earned this moment, and he knew it was only the beginning. Niji watched the match unfold, his expression carefully neutral as Hinata faced off against Lee with an unexpected ferocity. To anyone observing, he seemed detached, indifferent even, but beneath his calm facade, he felt a simmering frustration. That his inferior cousin, the timid girl he'd once dismissed as weak and spineless, had advanced further than he had was almost unthinkable. The fact that Lee, his teammate, the very image of tenacity and resilience, was struggling against her, added salt to the wound. Tenten, sitting beside him, leaned forward, her eyes wide with concern as she watched Hinata clutch her ribs. "Do you think she can still fight?" she asked, her voice full of worry. Niji barely spared her a glance. Of course he could fight through injuries like that, had it been him down there. But Hinata? The pampered, soft-hearted Hyuga heiress? He doubted she had the grit to hold her own with her body so battered. "I doubt it," he replied coolly, confident that she'd falter any moment now. But then something shifted in the arena, something subtle that only the trained eye of a Hyuga could catch. Hinata's stance, imperfect and shaky as it was, wasn't just a sign of weakness. There was intent behind it, a calculated vulnerability that drew Lee in, his confidence pushing him forward in an all-out rush to finish the fight. And that's when it happened. Niji's eyes widened, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. As Lee closed the distance, Hinata moved with a fluidity and precision that he had never seen from her before. Instead of dodging outright, she sidestepped at the last possible moment, angling her body to divert Lee's attack just enough to leave him exposed. Then, with a single, powerful movement, she thrust her palm upward, catching Lee under the chin in a perfectly timed strike that sent him reeling. Niji watched in stunned silence as Lee, off balance, attempted a desperate kick to regain control, only for Hinata to intercept him, seamlessly redirecting his momentum upward in an improvised technique that resembled the Kaiten but was somehow more focused, more precise. It was like watching a wheel spin on one axle rather than a full rotation, a controlled release of power aimed directly at her opponent. Lee's body spun in midair, entirely at Hinata's mercy. And then, as he came back around, his feet dangling helplessly, she seized his face with one hand and slammed him to the ground with a force that echoed through the arena. The crowd gasped, the noise punctuated by the dull thud of Lee's body hitting the earth. The proctor rushed forward, assessing Lee's condition before raising his hand. "Winner, Hinata Hyuga." A stunned silence fell over the arena, quickly followed by thunderous applause. The crowd erupted in cheers, an overwhelming sound that washed over the stunned onlookers as they realized what they'd just witnessed. The shy, unassuming heiress of the Hyuga clan had defeated Rock Lee, a taijutsu prodigy known for his relentless stamina and strength, in a match that showcased not just her skill, but her ingenuity and precision. Hinata had not merely won, she had proven herself a force to be reckoned with. Niji sat frozen, his mind racing to make sense of what he'd just seen. This wasn't the Hinata he knew. This wasn't the timid girl who flinched at the sight of her own shadow, the failure of the Hyuga clan. This was someone who had honed her own style, someone who had taken the Hyuga techniques and made them into something uniquely her own. And in that moment, Niji was forced to confront a bitter truth: he had underestimated her. She had not only proven him wrong, she had done so in a way that left no room for doubt. Next to him, Tenten was cheering, her face alight with pride and excitement for her friend. She turned to Niji, a triumphant grin on her face. "Did you see that? She actually did it. She took down Lee." Niji forced himself to nod, his gaze fixed on the arena where Hinata was being helped to her feet by the proctor. The bitterness in his chest felt heavier now, like a weight he couldn't shake. But beneath it, buried deep, was a flicker of something else. It wasn't admiration, at least, not yet. But it was respect, a begrudging acknowledgement that his cousin was far more capable than he'd ever allowed himself to believe. In the stands, Hayashi watched with his Byakugan still active, his gaze soft with pride as he took in his daughter's victory. She had fought with everything she had, risking injury and pushing through her pain. And she had emerged triumphant, not as the heir of the Hyuga clan, but as Hinata, a kunoichi who had carved her own path. Hayashi felt a warmth swell in his chest, a fierce pride that he hadn't expected. For the first time, he saw her not just as his daughter, but as a shinobi worthy of respect, a warrior in her own right. As the crowd continued to cheer, Hinata looked up, scanning the audience until her gaze landed on her father. When she saw the look in his eyes, she straightened, standing a little taller despite the pain radiating from her ribs. In that moment, all the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the endless hours of training, it all felt worth it. Niji's jaw tightened as he watched the silent exchange between his uncle and his cousin. Something inside him twisted, a sharp pang of resentment mixed with an uncomfortable realization that he couldn't ignore. Perhaps destiny was not as rigid as he'd always believed. Perhaps strength could come from unexpected places, even from someone he had once deemed unworthy. In the arena, Hinata turned and began to make her way off the field, each step measured and deliberate as she held her head high. The pain was still there, sharp and unyielding, but it no longer mattered. She had proven herself, not just to her father, or to the crowd, but to herself. She had fought her hardest, and she had won. And as she passed Niji in the stands, she met his gaze, her eyes calm and steady, her expression unreadable. In that brief glance, Niji felt a shift, an unspoken challenge lingering between them. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She was strong, and she knew it. As she continued walking, leaving him to his thoughts, Niji clenched his fists, the bitter taste of humility settling on his tongue. He would not forget this moment. And he knew, deep down, that his cousin would no longer be someone he could easily dismiss. Hinata arrived at the medical bay, her ribs still throbbing from her earlier match, only to find Naruto waiting for her. The surprise of seeing him there, so unexpectedly, dulled her pain for a moment. But then reality reasserted itself, and a sharp ache radiated through her chest, drawing a soft groan from her lips. Before she could even ask why he was there, a medic gently helped her onto an examination table, and Naruto stepped forward, all business, his face set with uncharacteristic professionalism. "Hi, Hinata-chan. Take this," he instructed, handing her 2 small pills and a cup with a creamy liquid that tasted faintly of vanilla. She couldn't help but smile softly at his serious tone, savoring the warmth of his presence after weeks of separation. She knew her father had requested Naruto stay away, to let her face the exams without relying on his support, but she'd missed him terribly. Even now, a part of her blamed Kakashi-sensei and her father for keeping them apart. "What did I take, Naruto-kun?" she asked, curious. "Pain pills and a high concentration of calcium," he replied, his tone still clinical. "More than you'd normally want, but it'll help mend your ribs faster." Hinata nodded, feeling a wave of soothing chakra radiate through her body as Naruto's hands hovered over her injured ribs, his focus intense. On the monitor nearby, she watched the current match between a Suna Kunoichi and a Kyumo ninja, though her gaze drifted back to Naruto whenever she could. She hadn't seen him in so long, and the sight of him, close enough to touch, was comforting beyond words. It made her feel grounded. "So, will I be able to fight again?" she asked quietly. Naruto hesitated before answering, clearly torn. "The more time I have, the better I can repair the damage. You're barely cleared to fight, but there's a higher risk of reinjury." Hinata frowned, understanding the risk but feeling compelled to continue. She wasn't sure her performance in the first match had been enough to earn a promotion, and she didn't want to miss this chance. Still, she was grateful for Naruto's care. She watched him with quiet admiration, marveling at how much he'd grown. When the Kyumo ninja forfeited against Tamari, and then the Suna ninja withdrew from his own match with Sasuke, she knew her next fight was up. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Am I cleared?" she asked, her voice steady. Naruto nodded reluctantly. "Just barely." It wasn't ideal, but it was enough. Determined, Hinata slid off the exam table, but before she left, she reached out and hugged him, letting the moment linger. "I missed you," she whispered, feeling the warmth of his arms around her as he hugged her back. "We saw each other yesterday," he said, a bit puzzled, but he returned her hug with genuine affection. Hinata giggled softly, understanding that he hadn't felt the same separation she had. "Let's meet up later, okay?" she asked, pulling back. "Okay," he agreed, and she hurried out of the room, not wanting to keep the proctor waiting. Tamari stood in the arena, taking in the sight of the Leaf Village crowd with a sense of irony. She was supposed to be here as part of an invasion, her rank delayed solely for the sake of Suna's plan. But with that plan in ruins and her siblings eliminated, her role had shifted. Now, she was here to salvage Suna's honor, to show that their village's ninja were still strong, still worthy of respect. Of course, that wasn't her only motivation. There was something satisfying about the thought of defeating Hinata Hyuga, the girl Naruto had spoken of so warmly, whose presence had been a vexing mystery. Naruto always talked about her as his best friend, but Tamari hadn't missed the warmth in his voice, the subtle protectiveness he showed whenever Hinata's name came up. A part of her wanted to prove that she was the superior kunoichi, to see for herself what made this girl so special to him. As the crowd cheered Hinata's return to the arena, Tamari took a deep breath, reminding herself of her strategy. She'd keep Hinata at a distance, overwhelm her with wind jutsu, and make this a quick, decisive victory. It would be a good show for Suna and, perhaps, a lesson for Naruto's precious Hyuga. "Hajime," the proctor called, and Tamari wasted no time, kicking off the ground to put space between her and Hinata. She opened her fan in a smooth, practiced motion, ready to unleash her first gust, but a sudden sharp pain radiated from her shoulder, catching her off guard. She stumbled, glancing down to see a thin trickle of blood staining her jacket. "What?" She looked back toward Hinata, who was closing in, her movements precise and focused. 2 more projectiles whizzed past Tamari's head, and she ducked instinctively, searching for the source. She realized, with a start, that they were water sanbon, thin, nearly invisible needles made from compressed water. Tamari grunted, slapping her shoulder to bring feeling back to it. She couldn't afford to lose mobility, especially in her fan arm. How is she doing this? She wondered, her mind racing as she calculated her options. Hinata's smug remark reached her ears. Dripping with unexpected condescension. "Get distance on a Hyuga." How original. The word stung, but Tamari gritted her teeth, focusing on her plan. She would not be bested by this girl. Drawing on her chakra, she summoned the wind jutsu she'd practiced 100 times, unleashing the great breakthrough technique to push Hinata back. But Hinata surprised her again, responding with a fireball jutsu, an attack Tamari hadn't expected from a Hyuga. She barely managed to deflect the flames with an even stronger gust of wind, but the effort left her vulnerable. In an instant, Hinata was upon her. Tamari felt a series of rapid, pinpoint strikes along her back, her chakra points being closed one by one. A split second later, a forearm pressed against her throat, tightening with surprising strength as Hinata forced her to the ground. The edges of Tamari's vision began to blur as her oxygen was cut off, her body locked in place by Hinata's iron grip. "This is for 10-10, Hinata whispered, her voice soft but fierce. The words barely registered before darkness claimed Tamari's vision, her body going limp as she slipped into unconsciousness. The proctor raised his hand. "Winner, Hinata Hyuga." The crowd erupted in cheers, a deafening wave of applause that echoed through the stadium. From the stands, Hayashi allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. His daughter had proven herself yet again, showing not just her skill, but her adaptability and resourcefulness. She had developed techniques that were entirely her own, incorporating fire and water manipulation alongside her gentle fist. She had taken everything she'd learned and used it to overcome an opponent who was meant to be her superior in range and power. In the medical bay, Naruto watched the monitors with a grin of pure pride. "That's my friend," he thought, feeling a warmth blossom in his chest. Hinata had grown so much since the academy days. She was strong, confident, and unyielding. He felt a surge of excitement at the thought of seeing her again, to tell her just how amazing she'd been. Back in the arena, as Hinata was escorted by medics, she glanced up at the stands, her gaze searching for Naruto. When she finally spotted him, she felt her heart skip a beat. He was cheering for her, a bright, proud smile lighting up his face, and in that moment, every bruise and ache felt worth it. She had done it, not just for her father or her clan, but for herself, and maybe, just a little, for the boy who had always believed in her. And as the crowd's cheers washed over her, Hinata allowed herself a small, triumphant smile, feeling for the first time that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Naruto blinked, the words sinking in slowly as he stared at Hinata. Sasuke wants to fight me, and he wants me to go all out? The medical bay was quiet, Lee looking between Naruto and the proctor with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The older boy's face softened as he processed what was happening, but he remained silent, perhaps sensing that this was something Naruto needed to decide on his own. Naruto's mind whirled. His fight with Orochimaru in the Forest of Death felt like a lifetime ago, a chaotic blur of terror, desperation, and fury. He'd tapped into a part of himself he didn't fully understand, a power that had been raw and dangerous, barely held in check. He hadn't even spoken to anyone about the fight since then, hadn't tried to explain the way Orochimaru had taunted him, how the Sannin had seemed to enjoy drawing out the worst in him. And now, Sasuke wanted to face that version of him? Naruto's fingers flexed involuntarily, a strange mixture of excitement and trepidation rising in his chest. He and Sasuke had been rivals, but it had always been a playful rivalry, a push-and-pull of competition and camaraderie. This felt different. There was a seriousness to Sasuke's request that felt charged, almost desperate. Why does he want this so badly? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The clock was ticking, and Hinata was waiting for his answer. Naruto glanced at Lee, who gave him an encouraging nod, his usual exuberance tempered by an understanding that seemed almost wise. If you don't want to do this, Naruto-kun, no one will think less of you, Lee said softly. But if you do, make sure you're true to yourself, not just to your rival. Naruto nodded, letting Lee's words settle over him. Then he looked back at Hinata, the decision already forming in his mind. Tell Sasuke I'll fight him, he said, his voice steady. And he'll get the real me, nothing held back. Hinata inclined his head, offering a slight, approving smile before he turned to relay the message. As he left, Naruto felt a strange calm wash over him, like the eye of a storm. This would be no ordinary sparring match. It would be a test, of their strength, of their bond, and of whatever it was that had been building between them since the start of the exams. The crowd murmured in confusion as Hinata returned to the arena, the proctor's calm presence doing little to quell the anticipation that hung heavy in the air. The Chunin exam finals had already seen one surprise match forfeited, and now it seemed another battle was about to take its place. Kakashi watched from the stands, a sinking feeling in his chest. Sasuke, what are you thinking? He'd known his student was struggling with something, a weight that had only grown heavier since their encounter with Orochimaru. But he hadn't anticipated this brazen, reckless challenge to his teammate, a teammate who was, in some ways, Sasuke's opposite in every way. And then Naruto stepped into the arena. The crowd stilled, the murmurs fading into an anticipatory hush. Naruto looked different, his usual grin replaced by a focused, intense expression. There was a fire in his eyes, a seriousness that Kakashi had rarely seen. He wasn't the carefree prankster today. Today, he was a shinobi, a warrior preparing to face a battle he understood would be more than just a test of skill. Sasuke was already waiting for him in the center of the arena, his posture tense but controlled, Sharingan eyes locked onto Naruto with a fierce intensity. Kakashi felt his chest tighten. He'd seen that look before, the hunger in Sasuke's gaze, the yearning to push beyond his limits, no matter the cost. And he knew, with a cold certainty, that this fight would be the culmination of all the pressure, all the resentment, all the unspoken questions that had simmered between these two since the exams began. When Naruto reached the center, Hinata addressed the crowd. This match was approved as a special request by Uchiha Sasuke, with Uzumaki Naruto accepting the challenge. He glanced between the two boys, his expression grave. This is not a regular exam bout. Both contestants have agreed to go all out. They will fight without restraint, and the winner will be declared based on knockout or concession. Do you both understand? Naruto nodded, his gaze steady. Yes. Sasuke smirked, his Sharingan flashing. More than ready. With that, Hinata stepped back, his eyes lingering on each of them before he raised his hand and brought it down. Begin. Sasuke moved first, his speed amplified by the intensity of his Sharingan. He closed the distance in a blur, kunai flashing toward Naruto's side. But Naruto was ready, his instincts sharpened from countless hours of sparring, missions, and sheer survival. He deflected the strike with a kunai of his own, the clang of metal ringing through the arena as he countered with a spinning kick. Sasuke ducked, dodging the kick by a hair's breadth, and retaliated with a flurry of punches, each one precise and calculated, aimed at Naruto's pressure points. Naruto blocked most of them, but Sasuke's strikes were relentless, his speed and precision honed to a razor's edge. The crowd watched in awe as the two genin traded blows, their movements a blur of raw power and skill. But Naruto wasn't just keeping up, he was pushing back. He could feel a familiar warmth bubbling up inside him, a strength that surged through his limbs with each strike, each dodge. This is what he wanted, Naruto realized. He wants to see the real me, the strength that I don't always show. In an instant, Naruto's expression shifted. The playful energy he usually carried vanished, replaced by something fierce, something raw. His chakra flared, his aura becoming almost visible as he tapped into the well of power he rarely dared to draw from. His eyes glowed with determination as he met Sasuke's gaze. You wanted this, Sasuke, he said, his voice low but carrying across the arena. So don't regret it. Without waiting for a response, Naruto formed a series of hand seals, summoning shadow clones in a flash. The stadium gasped as dozens of Narutos appeared, encircling Sasuke, their eyes all locked onto him with the same fierce resolve. Sasuke's Sharingan whirred, tracking each clone's movement, but the sheer number of them forced him to stay on the defensive. The clones charged in waves, attacking from every angle, each one a reflection of Naruto's intensity and skill. Sasuke fought them off, his Sharingan predicting their movements, his fists and kunai flashing as he cut down clone after clone. But the real Naruto stayed back, watching, biding his time, studying Sasuke's reactions. Finally, as Sasuke took down the last of the clones, Naruto struck. He closed the distance in a flash, his fist colliding with Sasuke's guard in a blow that sent shockwaves through the arena. Sasuke staggered, his eyes widening as he registered the force behind Naruto's punch. This wasn't the Naruto he'd thought he knew. This was someone stronger, someone who'd faced things Sasuke couldn't imagine, someone who carried a weight he hadn't recognized. And for the first time, Sasuke felt a pang of something foreign, respect, and maybe even fear. But he pushed it down, his face twisting into a fierce grin. This is it, he thought, exhilarated. This is what I wanted. Not bad, Naruto, he spat, his voice charged with a competitive edge. But I'm not done yet. Sasuke's hands flashed through a series of seals, and he inhaled deeply before releasing a fireball jutsu. The flames roared toward Naruto, but Naruto didn't flinch. He leapt over the fire, his chakra surging as he formed a Rasengan in his hand, a technique he'd only recently mastered, one he hadn't even revealed to Kakashi yet. Sasuke's eyes widened, but there was no time to react. Naruto closed the distance, bringing the spiraling sphere of chakra down toward Sasuke's chest. In a blur of motion, Sasuke twisted, barely dodging the Rasengan's full force, but the edge of the attack grazed him, sending him skidding back across the arena floor. He winced, clutching his side where the chakra had torn through his shirt, but his eyes were blazing. The crowd was silent, breathless as they watched the two boys, young warriors, stand across from each other, both battered, both breathing heavily, but neither willing to concede. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. This was more than just a test of skill. It was a declaration, a reminder to each other of who they were and what they would become. Finally, Sasuke lowered his stance, his smirk returning, though his expression was tinged with something like admiration. "I'll admit it, Naruto, you're stronger than I thought." Naruto grinned, a familiar warmth returning to his gaze as he let his chakra settle. "You're not so bad yourself, Sasuke. But remember, there's more to strength than just power." The proctor watched, sensing that both boys had reached their limit. He stepped forward, raising his hand. "This match is over." The crowd erupted into cheers, a thunderous roar of approval and excitement at the spectacle they had witnessed. Both boys had fought with everything they had, and the crowd's applause was a testament to the respect they had earned. As Naruto and Sasuke exchanged a final nod, Kakashi, watching from above, felt a surge of pride and relief. "They'll be all right," he thought. "They'll push each other, test each other, and maybe, just maybe, they'll save each other too." Sasuke lay still, his body aching in the sterile quiet of the hospital room as Kakashi's words sank in, each one cutting deeper than any blow Naruto had landed. He clenched his jaw, feeling frustration simmering under his bruised skin. He didn't want to admit it, but Kakashi was right, the fight with Naruto hadn't gone the way he'd imagined. Naruto's strength hadn't just exposed his own weaknesses, it had laid bare a truth that Sasuke had been avoiding: he wasn't as close to his goal as he'd thought. He was leagues away, grasping at shadows. Kakashi's gaze was steady, sharp with disappointment. Sasuke could feel it, even without looking at him. He didn't want Kakashi's pity, nor his lectures about patience or caution. He wanted answers, wanted power, wanted to bridge that yawning gap between him and his brother. If Naruto could push himself to face a Sannin, he thought bitterly, then why shouldn't I be able to do the same? "I needed to see for myself," Sasuke repeated, his voice low, tinged with frustration and resentment. "I needed to see why he's so much stronger. Why he can take risks, fight against impossible odds, and still walk away alive." Kakashi sighed, shaking his head slightly. "And you thought throwing yourself at him, unprepared, was the best way to do that?" Sasuke's fists tightened under the thin hospital sheet. "If I don't push myself, I'll never catch up to him. I'll never catch up to anyone." The last word was bitter, a reluctant confession of his deepest fear. It wasn't just Naruto he was chasing. It was Itachi. It was power. It was a future where he could be strong enough to face the man who'd stolen everything from him. "And look where that, pushing yourself, got you," Kakashi said quietly, his tone like a knife slipping between Sasuke's ribs. "You're in a hospital bed, battered and bruised, no closer to understanding anything than you were before you stepped into that arena." Sasuke closed his eyes, the memory of Naruto's strikes still vivid. His friend, rival, he corrected himself, had hit him harder than he'd thought possible, each punch backed by a confidence and power that seemed unshakable. When Naruto had fought, he hadn't fought with the desperation or blind anger that Sasuke had expected. He'd fought with purpose, each strike precise, each movement controlled. It wasn't just raw strength that Naruto had, it was focus, something Sasuke had thought only he possessed. Kakashi's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sasuke, you don't need to become someone else to get stronger. You don't need to follow Naruto's path, or anyone else's for that matter. Power isn't something you can simply take, it's something you have to grow into, over time, through experience, through learning to accept both your strengths and your weaknesses." Sasuke's eyes opened, staring at the ceiling, his mind a chaotic tangle of thoughts. He wanted to dismiss Kakashi's words as empty platitudes, wanted to believe that his sensei didn't understand. But a part of him knew that Kakashi had seen this before, that, perhaps, his sensei understood more than he let on. Maybe you're right, Sasuke muttered finally, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Maybe I was reckless. The admission stung, but he forced himself to say it, if only to ease the weight pressing on his chest. Kakashi seemed to consider this for a moment, and then he sighed, his gaze softening ever so slightly. Sasuke, I know you want to be strong. I know you think the only way to get there is by pushing yourself harder and harder, until there's nothing left to give. But strength isn't just about power or skill. It's about understanding yourself, about knowing when to fight and when to hold back. It's about making choices that protect not only yourself, but the people who care about you. Sasuke scoffed, the bitterness returning. I don't have time for that, Kakashi. Every day I waste is another day he's out there, stronger than me. Every second I hold back, is a second he's further beyond my reach. And if you destroy yourself chasing him, then you'll never reach him at all, Kakashi countered, his voice firm. You can't slay your monsters if you lose your humanity in the process, Sasuke. The price isn't worth it. Sasuke opened his mouth to argue, but Kakashi's gaze silenced him. There was a sadness in his sensei's eyes, a heaviness that spoke of battles and regrets that Sasuke couldn't yet comprehend. Why do you think I'm here, Sasuke? Kakashi asked, his voice softening. Why do you think I'm training you, guiding you? It's because I believe in you, because I want to see you grow into a shinobi who can protect this village, who can carry the will of fire forward. I want to see you become strong, stronger than even I am. But I also want to see you become someone who values more than just vengeance. Sasuke looked away, the weight of Kakashi's words pressing on him like a physical force. He didn't want to think about the future, about duty, about anything other than the single-minded goal that had driven him since he was a child. But a part of him, deep down, was beginning to understand the truth in Kakashi's words. His path, as it was now, could only end in destruction, either his own or someone else's. He opened his mouth, ready to say something, anything, but then Kakashi tossed something onto his chest with a soft thud. Sasuke looked down, his eyes widening as he saw the Chunin vest, a symbol of responsibility, of maturity, of Konoha's trust in his strength and judgment. It should have filled him with pride, with a sense of accomplishment. But instead, it only deepened the ache in his chest, a stark reminder of how far he still had to go. Hokage-sama believes you're ready to wear that and bear all that comes with it, Kakashi said, his tone neutral, almost clinical. But after today, I'm not so sure. Sasuke's fists clenched, the rejection stinging more than any lecture. He'd fought so hard, pushed himself so far, and yet, he was still falling short. Not because he lacked power, but because he lacked the understanding that Naruto, somehow, had already found. Kakashi's parting words were soft, almost a whisper. Sasuke, if you truly want to slay your monsters, then learn to do it without becoming one yourself. With that, he turned and left the room, leaving Sasuke alone with his thoughts and the too heavy weight of the Chunin vest lying on his chest. The room felt emptier in Kakashi's absence, the silence thick with the echoes of their conversation. Sasuke lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the fight with Naruto, each strike, each block, each moment of clarity in his rival's eyes. Naruto had fought with purpose, not just for himself, but for something larger, something Sasuke couldn't grasp. And maybe that was the difference. Sasuke closed his eyes, frustration and anger warring with something deeper, something more painful. He wanted to be strong, wanted to achieve his goal, but he was beginning to realize that his path was becoming a dark and lonely one. He wasn't sure he could change it, wasn't sure he wanted to. But Kakashi's words lingered in his mind, a quiet warning that he couldn't shake. As he lay there, the weight of the Chunin vest pressing down on him like an anchor, Sasuke made a silent promise to himself. He would grow stronger, he had to. But he would do it his own way, on his own terms. He would find his strength, even if it meant facing the shadows of his past alone. And if he had to embrace the darkness to reach his goal, so be it. As the group reached Naruto's apartment, laughter and teasing filled the air. Kiba, Shino, Ino, and the others chattered excitedly, each of them buzzing with energy after the intense day of matches. Kiba was still grumbling about Ino's assessment of his chances with Haku, but he couldn't help the eager smile creeping across his face. Naruto had been a friend to all of them, but today, especially after his fight with Sasuke, everyone wanted to celebrate the kind of strength that Naruto represented. Haku reached the door first, pulling out a key Naruto had given her. The others crowded around behind her, eager to get inside and set up for an impromptu celebration. They'd brought snacks, and Kiba had even managed to snag a few bottles of some, supposedly, non-alcoholic fizzy drink that would add a festive touch. But as Haku opened the door and they stepped inside, they all stopped short, a collective intake of breath as they took in the scene before them. There, in the middle of the living room, stood Naruto and Hinata, close enough that they might as well have been the only two people in the world. Hinata's face was flushed, her hand resting lightly on Naruto's chest as he looked down at her with a softness that none of them had seen before. And then, just as they processed what was happening, Naruto leaned forward, and their lips met in a sweet, tender kiss. The room went silent, each of them frozen in place, caught between the urge to retreat and the temptation to watch. Kiba's jaw dropped, Shino adjusted his sunglasses with a quiet, and Ino clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a squeal. Lee's eyes sparkled with joy for his friends, and Tenten nudged him with an excited grin. Even Neji, though he kept his usual impassive expression, seemed momentarily taken aback. After a long, blissful moment, Naruto and Hinata pulled apart, both of them looking a little dazed. Hinata's cheeks were crimson, but her eyes shone with happiness, and Naruto's grin was as wide as they'd ever seen it. He looked down at her, a bit breathless, and murmured, "Hinata-chan. I didn't know you felt that way." Hinata, struggling to find her voice, managed a shy but radiant smile. I've felt that way for a long time, Naruto-kun." There was a beat of silence, and then, well, Kiba's voice cut through the quiet like a knife, full of mischief. "Looks like the secret's out, huh?" Naruto and Hinata sprang apart, both of them turning to face their friends with expressions of sheer embarrassment. Naruto's face went beet red, and Hinata looked like she might faint, but there was no hiding now. The entire group had witnessed their first kiss, and judging by the laughter and smirks that followed, they wouldn't be allowed to forget it any time soon. "Kiba!" Naruto exclaimed, his face burning. "How long have you all been standing there?" "Long enough." Ino teased, folding her arms and giving them both a sly smile. "About time, honestly." Haku, ever calm and graceful, stepped forward, offering a gentle smile to both Naruto and Hinata. "Congratulations to both of you," she said, her voice warm. "You make a wonderful pair." Hinata, still blushing furiously, managed a nod of gratitude. Thank you, Haku-san." Lee clapped his hands together, eyes shining. "What a splendid display of youthful passion. Naruto-kun, Hinata-san, I wish you both the flames of eternal love and friendship." Naruto looked like he was about to protest, to say it wasn't like that, but he stopped himself, glancing back at Hinata. Maybe it was like that, he realized, or at least the beginning of something close to it. A feeling of warmth filled his chest as he smiled back at her, unbothered by the teasing now. Let them laugh. He was happy, and for once, that was enough. The group quickly set to work, pulling out snacks, drinks, and creating a cozy gathering space in the small living room. They all settled in, chatting and laughing, the earlier awkwardness melting away as Naruto and Hinata joined their friends on the floor, both of them trying to act natural under the knowing looks of their teammates. As the evening went on, Kiba and Ino continued to needle Naruto about his big moment, while Shino occasionally offered dry, well-timed comments that only made things worse. But through it all, Hinata stayed close to Naruto, her quiet confidence seeming to grow as the night wore on. Eventually, Naruto glanced over at her, his voice soft. "You know, Hinata-chan. I don't think I've ever been this happy. Thanks for sticking by me. It means a lot." Hinata's eyes shone, and she reached over to take his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I always will, Naruto-kun." As the night grew late, and the laughter softened to quiet conversation, Naruto felt a profound sense of contentment settle over him. Surrounded by friends, with Hinata by his side, he realized that these people, this warmth, this joy, was what he had always fought for. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at peace. In the corner, Kakashi watched his students with a quiet smile, having slipped in unnoticed to observe from a distance. He saw the way Naruto and Hinata looked at each other, the way Sasuke, for all his usual aloofness, seemed to soften around his friends. "They're going to be all right," he thought. "All of them." And with that reassuring thought, he slipped back out into the night, content to let his students, his family, celebrate together. Tonight was theirs, and he wouldn't interrupt it for the world. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more content. Support the original author by clicking their profile link in the pinned comment of the first video of this series. They deserve the love. Want early access and exclusive content? Join my Patreon community, link below. Your support fuels these videos. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay entertained, stay safe. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more content. Support the original author by clicking their profile link in the pinned comment of the first video of this series. They deserve the love. Want early access and exclusive content? Join my Patreon community, link below. Your support fuels these videos. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay entertained, stay safe.